Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Rob Mitchell had built his life on two principles: loyalty and strength. At 42, he carried himself with the measured precision of a man who had seen combat in 3 different countries and survived worse than most people could imagine. His weathered hands, scarred from years as a special forces operative before transitioning to private security consulting, now spent their days building something he thought would last forever: a family. The Mitchell household on Maple Street looked like every other suburban dream. Rob had purchased the 2-story colonial with cash after his final overseas contract, determined to give his wife Linda and their 8-year-old daughter Emma the stability he'd never known growing up in foster care. Linda, with her honey blonde hair and doe eyes, had seemed like salvation when they met 6 years ago at a charity gala. She was volunteering at the children's booth, and Emma, then 2 and recently adopted by Rob as a single father, had immediately gravitated toward Linda's gentle demeanor. What Rob didn't see then, blinded by hope and loneliness, was the calculated way Linda assessed his bank account, his property, his potential. Linda Reeves had grown up in a family where appearance mattered more than substance, where her mother taught her that a woman's security came from the man she could catch, not the life she could build. At 28, when they married, Linda was already perfecting the art of being whatever someone needed her to be. Their marriage had been comfortable, if not passionate. Rob worked long hours consulting for corporate security firms, building a reputation that commanded premium rates. Linda managed their social calendar, joining the right neighborhood committees, befriending the right wives. Emma thrived in school, her natural intelligence shining despite the trauma of her early years in the system. But comfort had bred carelessness in Linda. The thrill of playing the perfect wife began to wear thin, especially when Rob's work demanded frequent travel. That's when Derek Phillips entered their orbit. Derek was everything Rob wasn't: smooth where Rob was direct, charming where Rob was intense, weak where Rob was strong. He'd moved to their neighborhood 8 months ago, taking over his deceased father's struggling accounting firm. At 35, Derek was divorced, attractive in a non-threatening way, and desperately insecure beneath his practiced smile. He'd noticed Linda immediately at the neighborhood barbecue, the way she seemed restless despite her perfect life. Their affair began with stolen glances across the yard during block parties, progressed to afternoon coffee while Rob traveled, and culminated in afternoon encounters at Derek's office above the old bank building downtown. Linda told herself it wasn't serious, just excitement, something to fill the void of a marriage that had become predictable. Rob sensed something had shifted. Linda's laughter seemed forced, her affection mechanical. She developed new interests: yoga classes that ran late, book clubs that met frequently, volunteer work that demanded odd hours. But Rob had learned in the military that suspicion without evidence was poison, so he waited, watched, and hoped he was wrong. The first real crack appeared 3 weeks ago when Emma came home crying from her Aunt Carol's house, Linda's sister who lived across town. Carol's twin boys, both 10 years old, had pushed Emma off their trampoline, calling her names about being adopted. When Rob confronted Linda about it, she dismissed it as kids being kids and suggested Emma was too sensitive. But Rob knew his daughter. Emma was resilient, tougher than most kids her age had to be. If she was crying, someone had crossed a line. That night, he began paying closer attention to everything: Linda's phone calls, her schedules, the way she avoided his eyes when she spoke. The pattern became clear with sickening clarity. Linda was closest to Carol, who'd been covering for her sister's indiscretions for months. Carol's boys were parroting things they'd overheard their mother saying about Emma, about Rob, about their family. The cruelty toward Emma wasn't random childhood bullying. It was learned behavior from adults who had lost respect for Rob and his family. Rob's hands tightened around his coffee mug as he sat in his study that evening, pieces of betrayal clicking into place like the components of a weapon he'd assembled too many times to count. Outside, Linda was tending her garden, humming softly oblivious to the storm gathering behind his quiet eyes. Emma burst through the front door, backpack dragging behind her face flushed with excitement about something that happened at school. In that moment, watching his daughter's pure joy, Rob felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Whatever Linda had done, whatever she was planning to do, Emma would be protected. And anyone who threatened that protection would learn exactly why Robert Mitchell had earned his reputation in places where mercy was a luxury no one could afford. The foundation of their perfect suburban life was about to crumble, and Rob would be the one holding the sledgehammer. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The neighborhood block party was Linda's idea, as most social gatherings were. She'd spent the morning arranging flowers and preparing her famous potato salad, playing the role of perfect hostess with practiced ease. Rob watched her from the kitchen window as she flitted between neighbors, her smile bright and engaging, her laughter carrying across the yard. Derek Phillips arrived fashionably late, carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing he belonged. Rob observed the subtle dance between his wife and the newcomer. The way Derek's eyes found Linda immediately, how she seemed to glow under his attention. The carefully orchestrated coincidental moments when they ended up near each other. Emma spent most of the party playing with the younger kids, but Rob noticed how she avoided her cousins, Carol's twin boys Jason and Kyle. When the boys started a game of tag, Emma hung back, suddenly finding reasons to help Linda with serving duties instead of joining the fun. "She's being antisocial," Carol commented to Linda, loud enough for Rob to hear. "Maybe she needs to learn to toughen up a bit. My boys could teach her." Rob set down his beer with deliberate control. "Emma's fine the way she is." Carol's smile was sharp around the edges. "Of course she is. But sometimes kids need to learn the real world isn't going to coddle them. Especially kids who, well, you know how it is." The pause before "you know how it is" hung in the air like a slap. Rob felt his jaw tighten, but Linda quickly intervened with nervous laughter. "Carol, don't be silly. Emma's just tired from school." But Rob caught the look that passed between the sisters, complicit, knowing. They discussed Emma before, probably in ways that would make his blood boil if he knew the details. The party continued without incident until Derek offered to help Linda clean up. Rob was talking to their neighbor Mike about contractor recommendations when he noticed the easy familiarity between Derek and Linda as they moved around each other in the kitchen. Derek knew where the dishes belonged, where Linda kept the serving spoons. He'd been in their kitchen before, often enough to learn the layout. That night, after Emma was asleep and Linda was taking one of her increasingly long baths, Rob did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He went through her phone. The messages were carefully deleted, but Linda had never been particularly tech-savvy. Rob's military training included digital forensics, and it took him less than an hour to recover 3 months of conversations that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it took his breath away. "Derek, missed you today. When's your husband traveling again?" "Linda, next week. 3 days in Atlanta. We'll have the afternoons." "Derek, can't wait to have you to myself. This sneaking around is getting harder." "Linda, I know. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we just didn't have to hide anymore." "Derek, Rob would destroy both of us. Guy give me the creeps. Like he's always watching, waiting for something." "Linda, he's not as tough as he pretends. All that military stuff is just for show. He's actually pretty predictable." The messages went deeper, uglier. Linda complaining about Rob's cold nature, his obsession with Emma, his paranoid attention to detail. Derek feeding her resentment, painting himself as the understanding alternative to Rob's intensity. But the message that made Rob's vision narrow to a tunnel of pure rage was from 2 weeks ago. "Linda, Emma keeps asking questions about why we don't spend time with her anymore. Maybe we should back off for a while." "Derek, the kid's not even yours by blood. Why let her control your life?" "Carol's right. You've babied her too long." "Linda, you're right. She needs to learn the world doesn't revolve around her. Maybe spending time with Jason and Kyle will teach her some resilience." Rob set the phone down with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of controlling the violence that wanted to explode from his chest. They'd been using Emma as a pawn, deliberately exposing her to Carol's boy's cruelty to teach her resilience. His daughter, who'd already survived abandonment and the foster system, was being tortured for the convenience of his wife's affair. He sat in his study until dawn, staring at the wall where Emma's artwork hung next to her school photos. By the time Linda came downstairs for her morning coffee, Rob had made a series of decisions that would change everything. "I'm taking Emma to Carol's this afternoon," Linda announced, not meeting his eyes. "The boys want to play, and I think it's good for her to interact with family." Rob nodded slowly. "Good idea. Maybe I'll come along." Linda's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. "Oh, you don't need to do that. I know you're busy with work." "I'm never too busy for Emma." Linda forced a smile. "Of course not. I just meant, Carol's boys can be a handful. You might find it stressful. I think I can handle a couple of 10-year-olds. Something flickered in Linda's eyes. Calculation, concern. But she nodded and turned away, her phone already buzzing with what Rob knew would be frantic messages to Derek about the change in plans. That afternoon, Rob would finally see the full scope of his family's betrayal. And Linda, Derek, and everyone who'd enabled them would learn that Robert Mitchell's reputation for being dangerous wasn't military mythology. It was a promise. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Carol's house sat on 3 acres outside the main neighborhood, giving her boys plenty of space to run wild. The property backed up to dense woods, and Carol had often bragged about the natural playground it provided for active children. Rob had always found the isolation unsettling, but now, pulling into the gravel driveway with Linda and Emma, it felt ominous. Carol greeted them at the door with her usual brittle enthusiasm. At 34, she was Linda's older sister by 2 years, with the same blonde hair but harder edges around her eyes and mouth. Her ex-husband had left 18 months ago, citing irreconcilable differences, though Rob suspected Carol's volatile nature and drinking problem had been the real catalysts. "Rob, what a surprise," Carol said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Linda didn't mention you were coming." "Last-minute decision," Rob replied, watching how Carol's gaze darted to Linda with something approaching panic. Emma hung close to Rob's side as they entered the house. The living room was cluttered with video game controllers, empty soda cans, and the general chaos of unsupervised children. Jason and Kyle were sprawled on the couch, their attention fixed on a violent video game that seemed inappropriate for their age. "Boys, Emma's here," Carol announced. Kyle glanced over, his expression shifting to something unpleasant. "Great, the baby's back." "Kyle," Carol said without conviction, making no real effort to correct him. Jason paused the game and turned to face Emma fully. "Mom says you're not really part of our family anyway. Dad says Uncle Rob got stuck with damaged goods." The words hung in the air like physical blows. Emma's face crumpled, but before Rob could respond, Linda laughed nervously. "Kids say the darndest things, don't they?" Rob felt something fundamental shift inside him. The woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted with his daughter's well-being, was standing there making excuses for deliberate cruelty toward an 8-year-old child. His child. "Emma, why don't you go play in the backyard?" Linda suggested. "The boys can show you their new trampoline." Emma looked up at Rob with pleading eyes, but Linda was already ushering her toward the back door. "Go on, sweetheart. Have fun." Rob followed them outside, his senses heightened in the way they'd been trained during reconnaissance missions. Carol poured herself a large glass of wine despite it being only 3 in the afternoon, and Linda checked her phone constantly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The boys led Emma to the large trampoline set up near the tree line. What happened next will be burned into Rob's memory forever. "Only real family gets to go first," Jason announced, climbing onto the trampoline. Kyle followed, and they began jumping aggressively, making the surface unstable. "Come on, Emma," Kyle called. "If you can get on, you can jump with us." Emma approached hesitantly. As she tried to climb up, Jason deliberately jumped hard, sending her tumbling backward onto the ground. She landed awkwardly, clutching her arm. "Oops," Kyle said with a laugh. "Guess you're not tough enough." Emma sat on the grass, tears streaming down her face, holding her arm. Rob started forward, but Linda was already moving. "Emma, get up," Linda said sharply. You're fine. My arm hurts, Emma whimpered. You just fell. Stop being dramatic. Linda's voice carried across the yard, and Rob felt his world tilt sideways. This wasn't the loving stepmother who'd read Emma bedtime stories and helped with homework. This was a stranger wearing Linda's face. Carol appeared beside Linda, wine glass in hand. She's a bit sensitive, isn't she? The boys play rougher than that all the time. He's a boy, Linda said, gesturing toward Jason. She must have said something to upset him. The words hit Rob like physical blows. His wife, the woman he'd trusted with everything, was not only failing to protect Emma, but actively participating in her humiliation. Emma looked around the yard, seeking help from the adults who were supposed to protect her. Finding none, she sat there holding her arm, trying not to cry harder. That's when Rob moved. He walked across the yard with deadly calm, his footsteps silent on the grass. He knelt beside Emma, gently examining her arm. It wasn't broken, but it was definitely tender. Boys, he said softly, not looking up from Emma. Come here. Jason and Kyle exchanged glances, suddenly unsure. There was something in Rob's voice that made the air feel dangerous. Now, Rob said, still quiet. They climbed down from the trampoline, moving with reluctant steps. Rob stood slowly, keeping Emma behind him. When he looked at the boys, they instinctively took a step back. His eyes held the kind of cold focus they'd seen in movies, but never experienced in real life. You pushed my daughter, Rob said. On purpose. We were just playing, Jason stammered. No. Rob's voice cut through the excuse like a blade. You hurt her deliberately, and then you laughed about it. Carol hurried over, her wine sloshing. Rob, they're just kids. You're scaring them. Rob ignored her, his attention fixed on Linda. Tell them to apologize. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Rob, maybe we should just tell them to apologize. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Linda looked between Rob and her sister, calculation flickering in her eyes. Finally, she shook her head. They're boys, Rob. Emma needs to learn to handle herself. Maybe she should apologize for disrupting their game. The world went very quiet. Rob could hear his heartbeat, feel the blood moving through his veins. Emma looked up at him with trust and confusion, waiting for him to fix this the way he always fixed things. Rob smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Emma, he said gently. Come here, sweetheart. He picked her up, settling her against his hip. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he could feel her small body shaking with suppressed tears. Rob looked at Linda for a long moment, memorizing her face. Then he turned and walked toward the house without a word. Rob, where are you going? Linda called after him. He didn't answer. He walked through Carol's house, out the front door, and loaded Emma into his truck. Linda appeared as he was buckling Emma's seatbelt. Rob, don't be ridiculous. We drove here together. Call Derek, Rob said quietly. I'm sure he'll give you a ride. Linda's face went white. What's that supposed to mean? Rob got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Through the windshield, he could see Linda's mouth moving, her hands gesturing frantically. But he was done listening to her voice. As they drove away, Emma finally spoke. Daddy, are we going home? Yes, baby, we're going home. But home was about to become something very different. Because in 48 hours, Rob was going to make a phone call that would change everything. And Linda, Derek, Carol, and everyone who'd participated in hurting his daughter would learn that some men don't just get angry. They get even. Chapter 4, The Call. 2 days after leaving Carol's house, Rob sat in his study with Emma curled up in the chair beside him, reading a book about horses. Her arm was fine. No real damage done. But the emotional impact lingered in the way she stayed close to him, seeking reassurance that the adults in her world could still be trusted. Linda had been trying to normalize the situation ever since they'd returned home. She made Emma's favorite pancakes, suggested a trip to the toy store, and asked repeatedly if Rob was still upset about the silly misunderstanding at Carol's. Each attempt at casual dismissal only deepened Rob's resolve. The phone rang at 3:47 p.m. Rob had been expecting this call. Mr. Mitchell? This is Detective Angela Rodriguez with the State Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you about Derek Phillips. Rob glanced at Emma, who was absorbed in her book, then stepped into the hallway. "What about Mr. Phillips?" "Sir, we have reason to believe Mr. Phillips has been involved in some serious financial irregularities. We'd like to discuss your relationship with him and any business dealings you might have had." "I see," Rob said carefully. "When would be convenient? Would this afternoon work? We can meet at our field office, or if you prefer, we can come to you." "The office would be fine. Should I bring an attorney?" "That's your choice, sir. At this point, we're just gathering information. Mr. Phillips listed you as a character reference on some loan applications, so we're talking to everyone who knows him professionally." Rob smiled into the phone. "Of course. I'll be there in an hour." The conversation had been perfectly choreographed because Detective Rodriguez didn't exist. The voice belonged to Maria Santos, a former military intelligence specialist who now ran a private investigation firm in the state capital. Rob had worked with Maria on 3 overseas contracts, and she owed him her life from extraction in Moldova that had gone sideways. Rob had called Maria 3 days ago with a simple request: create a scenario that would require Derek Phillips to come to the local police station for questioning about financial crimes. It didn't need to be real, just convincing enough to get Derek alone and nervous for several hours while Rob set other pieces in motion. Linda was in the kitchen when Rob came downstairs. "I need to run some errands," he told her. "Will you be here with Emma?" "Of course," Linda said, not looking up from her laptop. She'd been typing frantically for the past hour, probably updating Derek about the mysterious developments. Rob kissed Emma goodbye and drove to the strip mall downtown where Derek's accounting office was located. The building was old, with narrow hallways and thin walls, perfect for what Rob had planned. Derek's secretary had left early for a dentist appointment, according to the note on the outer door. Derek himself was nowhere to be seen, which meant Maria's fake police call had worked perfectly. Rob used a key he'd had made weeks ago. Lifting Derek's keys during a neighborhood gathering had been embarrassingly easy, and let himself into the office. Rob had spent 2 decades learning how to disappear evidence, plant false trails, and make people believe things that weren't true. Derek's office computer took less than 20 minutes to compromise completely. Rob installed software that would log every keystroke, record every phone call, and transmit copies of all communications to an encrypted server. But the surveillance equipment was just the beginning. Rob moved through Derek's office like a professional, photographing documents, copying files, and building a comprehensive picture of Derek's life, finances, and weaknesses. What he found was better than he'd hoped. Derek Phillips was drowning in debt. His father's accounting firm was hemorrhaging money. Clients were leaving in droves, and Derek had been borrowing heavily to maintain his lifestyle. More interesting were the corners Derek had been cutting: tax filings that were questionable, client funds that had been temporarily borrowed, relationships with business owners who operated in gray legal areas. None of it was serious enough for actual criminal charges, but all of it was serious enough to destroy Derek's reputation and livelihood if presented correctly. Rob was finishing his work when he heard footsteps in the hallway. He slipped into Derek's private bathroom and waited. Derek burst into his office, talking rapidly on his phone. "I don't understand why they call me down there. They said something about loan applications and character references, but I haven't applied for any loans recently." A pause, then, "Linda, I'm scared. If they start digging into my business, they might find other things that could hurt both of us." Another pause. "No, we can't meet tonight. If they're watching me, we need to be careful. Maybe we should cool things off for a while." Rob smiled in the darkness of the bathroom. Fear was making Derek paranoid, driving a wedge between him and Linda. Phase 1 was complete. Derek ended his call and spent the next hour frantically organizing files and deleting computer records. Each action was being recorded by Rob's surveillance equipment, building a digital trail that would be useful later. When Derek finally left for the day, Rob emerged from his hiding place and made one final addition to the office: a small recording device, virtually undetectable, positioned to capture every conversation Derek had in his office for the next several weeks. Rob drove home as the sun was setting, his mind already moving to Phase 2. Emma ran to greet him at the door, her face bright with excitement. "Daddy, Linda made my favorite dinner, and she said we could watch a movie tonight." Rob hugged his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Over Emma's head, he could see Linda watching from the kitchen doorway, her expression carefully arranged into a mask of domestic contentment. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Rob said. "Why don't you go pick out the movie while I talk to Linda for a minute?" Emma scampered upstairs, and Linda approached with cautious steps. "How were your errands?" she asked. "Productive," Rob replied. "Very productive." Linda searched his face for clues, but Rob had learned long ago how to reveal nothing when it mattered. He moved past her toward the kitchen, already planning the next day's activities. "Rob," Linda's voice was strained. "Is everything okay between us?" Rob turned back to her, letting his gaze linger on her face. She was still beautiful, still perfectly put together. But now he could see the calculation behind her eyes, the constant measuring of angles and advantages. "Everything's fine, Linda. Just fine." That night, as they watched Emma's movie together on the couch, Rob felt the strange peace that came with absolute certainty. He knew exactly what he was going to do, exactly how each piece would fall. Linda sat beside him, probably believing she'd weathered the worst of his suspicion, planning her next meeting with Derek. She had no idea that her world was about to implode in ways she couldn't imagine. And Derek, sitting in his office 3 miles away, reviewing his files for anything that might interest law enforcement, had no idea that he was already caught in a trap that was just beginning to close. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Maria, "Package delivered successfully. Target very cooperative and very nervous. Ready for phase 2 when you are." Rob deleted the message and pulled Emma closer as the movie continued. His daughter's laughter filled the room, pure and trusting, reminding him exactly why he was willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to protect her. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. Derek's paranoia grew like cancer over the next week. The fake police questioning had shaken him more than Rob had anticipated, and the surveillance equipment captured a man slowly coming apart. Derek checked his locks 3 times each night, jumped at unexpected sounds, and began drinking heavily after office hours. But it was the phone call from Linda that pushed Derek over the edge. "I think Rob knows." Linda's voice came through crystal clear on the recording device. "He's been different since Carol's house. Watching me, asking strange questions." "What kind of questions?" Derek's voice was strained. "Yesterday, he asked how long I've known you. Today, he wanted to see my phone to look up a restaurant number. He's never done that before. Maybe we should stop seeing each other for a while, just until things calm down. Derek, I need you to understand something." Linda's voice took on a cold edge that Rob recognized, but Derek apparently didn't. "If Rob finds out about us, he'll destroy both of us. But if you abandon me now, I'll destroy you first." There was a long silence. "What's that supposed to mean? I know about your money problems. I know you've been borrowing from client accounts. I know about the tax returns you've been filing. If you want my protection from Rob, you'd better not even think about throwing me away." Rob listened to the recording from his truck, parked outside Derek's office building. Through the second-floor window, he could see Derek pacing behind his desk, looking increasingly frantic. Linda wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was manipulative, calculating, and dangerous. She'd been collecting leverage on Derek the same way she'd probably been collecting it on Rob. Insurance policies for when relationships became inconvenient. Rob's phone rang. Carol's name appeared on the screen. "Rob, we need to talk," Carol said without preamble. "Linda called me crying this morning. She thinks you're planning to leave her. Is that so? She's worried about Emma. If you divorce Linda, what happens to Emma's relationship with our family?" Rob felt his jaw tighten. "Emma's relationship with your family?" "Well, Linda's been like a mother to her, and the boys have gotten so close to their cousin. It would be devastating to break up that bond." The sheer audacity of the lie took Rob's breath away. Carol was rewriting history, painting Linda as a devoted stepmother and her cruel sons as loving cousins. "Carol, your boys pushed Emma off a trampoline and called her damaged goods." "Oh, Rob, that's not what happened at all." Linda explained everything. Emma misunderstood some typical boy behavior and got her feelings hurt. You know how sensitive she can be. Rob ended the call without another word. Carol and Linda had coordinated their story, creating a version of events where Emma was the problem and Linda was the victim. They were preparing for war, which meant they knew war was coming. That evening, Rob implemented phase 3 of his plan. He waited until Linda was in the shower, then called Derek's office from the house phone. Derek Phillips speaking. This is Robert Mitchell. I think we need to have a conversation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. About what? Derek finally managed. About my wife. About my daughter. About the choices you've been making. I don't know what you're talking about. Derek, I know everything. Every meeting, every message, every lie you've helped Linda tell. The question is whether we handle this like civilized men or whether I handle it my way. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a chance to minimize the damage. Meet me tomorrow night at the old quarry on Route 9. Come alone, and we'll discuss terms. Terms for what? For how much of your life you get to keep when this is over. Rob hung up and deleted the call from the phone's memory. Upstairs, he could hear Linda singing in the shower, probably planning her next move in what she thought was a chess game she could win. Rob spent the next day making final preparations. He visited 3 different banks, liquidating accounts Linda didn't know existed. He met with his lawyer, updating his will and Emma's custody arrangements. He called his former commanding officer, now retired in Montana, and arranged for Emma to spend her summer vacation there if necessary. Most importantly, he visited Maria Santos at her investigation firm. I need you to document everything, Rob told her, sliding a thick folder across her desk. The affair, the financial irregularities, the pattern of abuse toward my daughter. Make it official, legal, and unshakable. Maria flipped through the evidence Rob had gathered. Photos, recordings, financial records, witness statements from neighbors who'd observed Derek's frequent visits to the house. This is comprehensive, she said. More than enough for a divorce proceeding. But Rob, this isn't just about divorce, is it? No, it's about making sure they never hurt Emma again, and making sure they never hurt another family. Maria studied his face. She'd seen that expression before, in places where the rules were different and justice was a luxury that civilized society couldn't always afford. What do you need from me? Documentation. When this is over, I want the record to show exactly who they are and what they've done. I want it so clear that no court, no family member, no friend will ever take their side again. That night, Derek called Linda. Rob listened to the conversation through his surveillance equipment, watching Linda pace in their bedroom while she talked. He wants to meet at the quarry, Derek said. Linda, I think he's going to kill me. Don't be ridiculous. Rob's not violent. You didn't hear his voice. This isn't about talking things through. He knows everything, and he's planning something. So don't go. And then what? You said yourself he'll destroy both of us. At least if I meet with him, maybe I can convince him to let me leave town quietly. Linda was quiet for a long moment. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe you should leave town. Are you serious? After everything we've planned? After what you said about protecting each other? Derek, I have a daughter to think about. If Rob's as dangerous as you think, I need to prioritize Emma's safety. Even Derek caught the lie in that statement. You mean you need to prioritize your own safety? Think whatever you want. But if you're smart, you'll disappear before Rob decides talking isn't enough. Derek hung up without saying goodbye. Linda stood in their bedroom for a long moment, then began packing a small bag. She was preparing to run, abandoning Derek to face Rob's wrath alone. Rob watched his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, stuff cash and jewelry into an overnight bag, probably planning to disappear before the meeting at the quarry could take place. She was going to let Derek face the consequences of their affair alone while she escaped to start over somewhere else. But Linda had made one critical miscalculation. She thought Rob's anger was focused on Derek, that removing Derek from the equation would allow her to rebuild her marriage through manipulation and time. She had no idea that Rob's fury wasn't divided between them. It was multiplied by them. And tomorrow night, at the quarry, Derek would learn exactly what happened to men who hurt Robert Mitchell's daughter. But Derek's punishment would be only the beginning. Linda's reckoning was still coming. It would be far worse than anything Derek could imagine. Chapter 6, The Quarry. The abandoned quarry on Route 9 had been closed for 15 years, leaving behind a moonscape of broken stone and dark water. Local teenagers used it for parties and dares, but on weeknight evenings it was deserted, surrounded by dense woods that muffled sound and hid secrets. Rob arrived an hour early, positioning himself with tactical precision. He changed into dark clothing and military-grade boots, items he hadn't worn since his last overseas contract. The familiar weight of preparation settled around him like armor. Derek's headlights appeared at exactly 9 o'clock, sweeping across the quarry's entrance with nervous jerks as he navigated the rutted dirt road. Rob watched from the shadows as Derek parked near the water's edge and sat in his car for several minutes, gathering courage or perhaps writing final messages. When Derek finally emerged, he looked like a man walking to his execution. His usual cocky confidence had evaporated, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who'd finally realized he was outmatched. "Rob," Derek called into the darkness. "I'm here." Rob emerged from behind a pile of broken limestone, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive in hostile territories. Derek started violently at his appearance. "Jesus Christ, you scared me." "Good," Rob said. "Fear is appropriate right now." They stood 20 feet apart, the dark water of the quarry stretching behind Derek like an open grave. Rob had chosen the positioning deliberately. Derek's back to the water, no easy escape routes, nowhere to run. "Look, Rob, I know what this looks like," Derek began, his words tumbling over each other. "But Linda and we never meant for things to go this far. It just happened, you know? Sometimes people connect and—" "Stop talking," Rob said quietly. Derek's mouth snapped shut. "You've been in my home," Rob continued. "You've been with my wife. You've participated in the psychological abuse of my 8-year-old daughter. And now you're going to stand there and tell me it just happened? The thing with Emma, that wasn't my idea. That was all Linda and Carol. I told Linda she was being too hard on the kid." Rob smiled, and Derek took an involuntary step backward. "You told Linda she was being too hard on Emma? That's interesting, because I have recordings of you calling my daughter not really family and suggesting Linda should stop babying her." Derek's face went white. "Recordings? I've been watching you for weeks, Derek. I know about your financial problems, your drinking, your pathetic attempts to seem important. I know you've been stealing from client accounts and filing fraudulent tax returns. I know you're 3 months behind on your office rent, and that your ex-wife took everything in the divorce because she discovered you were cheating with your secretary." Each revelation hit Derek like a physical blow. He was dealing with a man who'd done more than discover an affair. He was facing someone who'd systematically dissected his entire life. "What do you want?" Derek whispered. "I want you to understand exactly who you've been fucking with," Rob said. "I want you to know that Linda isn't some innocent housewife who got swept away by romance. She's a predator who targeted you because she thought you were weak enough to manipulate and wealthy enough to be useful. That's not true. She's been recording your conversations, Derek, keeping evidence of your financial crimes as insurance. If I'd never discovered the affair, she would have used that information to control you indefinitely. And when she was done with you, she would have destroyed you to protect herself." Derek's breathing was becoming labored. "You're lying." Rob pulled out his phone and played a recording. Linda's voice, cold and calculating, describing Derek's vulnerabilities to Carol. "He's so desperate for affection, he can't see I'm setting him up. If Rob ever finds out, I'll throw Derek under the bus and play the victim. Men like Derek are useful until they become liabilities." Derek staggered as if he'd been shot. "When did she say that?" "Last week, while you were declaring your love and talking about running away together." The sound that escaped Derek's throat was somewhere between a sob and a scream. He'd been played by an expert, manipulated by someone who'd seen him coming from miles away. "Here's what's going to happen," Rob continued. "You're going to disappear. Tonight. You're going to close your business, settle your debts, and leave this state permanently. You will never contact Linda again, never mention Emma's name, and never return to this area. And if I don't," Rob's smile disappeared, "then I'll implement Plan B, which is I'll release evidence of your financial crimes to the state licensing board, the IRS, and every client whose money you've stolen. I'll ensure that Linda's recordings of your conversations are discovered during the investigation. And then, when you're facing federal charges and have no money for legal defense, I'll visit you in prison." Derek was crying now, understanding that his life as he'd known it was over regardless of which path he chose. "Why are you giving me an option to leave?" Derek asked. "Why not just destroy me here and now?" Rob considered the question seriously. "Because destroying you isn't my primary objective. Protecting Emma is. You leaving accomplishes that goal. You staying, in any capacity, forces me to escalate to methods that would upset my daughter." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Derek understood that Rob was offering mercy not for Derek's sake, but to avoid the complications that would come with more permanent solutions. "How do I know you won't come after me, even if I leave?" "Because I keep my word," Rob said. "But Derek, understand this clearly. If you ever threaten my family again, if you ever come near Emma, if you even search for her on social media, I will find you. And when I do, there won't be any conversations or choices. There will just be consequences." Derek nodded frantically. "I'll leave. Tonight. I'll disappear completely." "Good." Rob pulled an envelope from his jacket. "There's $10,000 in cash. Enough to get you started somewhere else. Consider it severance pay." Derek took the envelope with shaking hands. "Why would you help me?" "I'm not helping you. I'm buying insurance that you'll stay gone." Derek stumbled back toward his car, clutching the money like a lifeline. As he reached for the door handle, Rob called out one final time. "Derek?" "Yeah. Linda's planning to run tonight, too. She's been packing while you were driving here. If you had any romantic notions about riding off into the sunset together, you should probably let those go." Derek's shoulders sagged with the weight of final defeat. He got into his car and drove away without looking back, carrying nothing but cash and the knowledge that he'd been played by everyone who'd claimed to care about him. Rob watched the taillights disappear into the woods, then pulled out his phone. Maria Santos answered on the first ring. "It's done," Rob said. "Derek Phillips will be leaving town tonight. Make sure the financial evidence gets to the appropriate authorities after he's gone. I want his business license revoked and his assets frozen, but only after he's had time to cross state lines." "What about Linda?" Rob looked across the dark water of the quarry, thinking about his wife, packing her bags, and planning her escape. She thought removing Derek would buy her time to rebuild her position, maybe even convince Rob that the affair had been Derek's idea all along. "Linda's punishment is just beginning," Rob said, "and it's going to be much worse than Derek's." Chapter 7. The Trap Closes. Linda was gone when Rob returned home at midnight. Emma was sleeping safely at their neighbor's house. Rob had arranged for a sleepover earlier in the day, knowing tonight would be complicated. The house felt different, empty, as if Linda's absence had lifted a poisonous cloud Rob hadn't realized was there. Linda's hasty packing job told a story of panic and guilt. She'd taken jewelry, cash, and important documents, but left behind photo albums and personal items that would be impossible to replace. This wasn't a planned departure. It was a desperate flight. Rob found the note on the kitchen counter, written in Linda's careful handwriting. "Rob, I need some time to think about our marriage. I'm staying with Carol for a few days while I figure things out. We need to talk about Emma's future and what's best for everyone. I love you both. Linda." Even fleeing in the middle of the night, Linda was still playing games, positioning herself as the thoughtful wife taking space to save their marriage. She had no idea that Rob had anticipated this move and prepared accordingly. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Linda Mitchell checked into the Riverside Motel on Highway 14 at 11:47 p.m. Room 237. Paid cash for 3 nights. The message was from Tommy Kowalski, a former military police officer who now worked private security in the area. Rob had called in a favor, knowing Linda would avoid Carol's house despite what her note claimed. Linda was too smart to involve her sister in whatever came next. She'd want distance and deniability. Rob spent the next hour implementing the final phases of his plan. Phone calls to strategic contacts, transfer of electronic files, activation of surveillance protocols that had been dormant for weeks. By dawn, Linda would be trapped in a web she didn't even know existed. The next morning, Rob picked up Emma from the sleepover and took her to breakfast at her favorite diner. She was unusually quiet, picking at her pancakes instead of devouring them with typical 8-year-old enthusiasm. "Daddy, where's Linda?" "She had to go visit your Aunt Carol for a few days," Rob said gently. "Sometimes adults need to spend time with their families." Emma nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Is she coming back?" Rob studied his daughter's face, seeing intelligence and intuition that most adults underestimated. Emma had sensed the tension in their house, the subtle shifts in relationship dynamics that children noticed even when they couldn't articulate them. "Maybe not, sweetheart. How would you feel about that?" Emma considered the question seriously, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Would it just be you and me again? Just you and me?" "That would be okay," Emma said quietly. "Linda's been different lately. Not mean exactly, but not nice the way she used to be." Rob felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. Emma had noticed Linda's changing behavior, the gradual erosion of affection and protection. His daughter was more perceptive than anyone had given her credit for. "You know what, Em? How about we spend the day doing whatever you want? Movies, ice cream, that bookstore you love." Emma's face brightened for the first time in weeks. "Really? The whole day? The whole day? Just the two of us?" While Emma ran to get her jacket, Rob's phone rang. Maria Santos's voice was crisp and professional. "Linda tried to access the joint accounts this morning. The banks flagged the attempts as suspicious and froze everything pending investigation." "Perfect. What about the other arrangements?" "The private investigator your friend Derek hired never existed. The phone number goes to a disconnected line, and the address was a vacant office building. Linda's going to spend the next few days chasing shadows." Rob smiled grimly. Linda thought she was being clever, hiring someone to investigate Rob's background and find leverage for divorce proceedings. She had no idea that Detective Morrison was actually another of Rob's former colleagues, feeding her false information and documenting her attempts at manipulation. "The employment verification checks also came back interesting," Maria continued. "Turns out Linda's been lying about her volunteer work for the past 6 months. The children's charity she claimed to manage? They've never heard of her. The literacy program she supposedly ran doesn't exist. Linda had been creating fictional charitable work to explain her absences while seeing Derek. She'd been building an elaborate facade of community involvement to cover for her affairs. Another layer of deception that painted her character clearly. "Maria, I need you to arrange one more thing. Can you have someone deliver a package to Linda at the motel? Nothing threatening, just information she needs to see." "What kind of information?" "Evidence that her escape plan isn't as clever as she thinks it is." That afternoon, while Rob and Emma were at the movies, Linda received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were photocopies of her bank attempts, photographs of her entering the motel, and a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Your husband isn't as predictable as you thought. Your lover isn't as loyal as you hoped. Your sister isn't as helpful as you expected. You're alone now, and every move you make is being watched. If you want to negotiate the terms of your surrender, call the number below. You have 24 hours. The phone number belonged to Maria's office, but Linda wouldn't know that. Linda called Carol immediately, her voice shrill with panic. "Carol, something's wrong. Rob knows everything, and he's been planning this. I need help." Carol's response was exactly what Rob had anticipated. "Linda, I can't get involved in your marriage problems. If Rob's really as dangerous as you think, I need to protect my boys. Maybe you should consider going back home and working things out." Linda's support system was crumbling exactly as Rob had engineered. Derek was gone. Her financial resources were frozen, and now her sister was backing away to protect herself. Linda was discovering that the relationships she'd thought she could rely on were all conditional, based on her ability to project strength and stability. That evening, Linda made the call to Maria's number. "This is Linda Mitchell. I received your message. Mrs. Mitchell, my client, is prepared to discuss terms for an amicable separation. Are you interested in hearing his proposal?" "Who is your client?" "I think you know the answer to that question." Linda was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of terms?" The kind that allow you to leave with your dignity intact instead of having your life systematically destroyed piece by piece. But Mrs. Mitchell, this offer expires tomorrow at noon. After that, my client will pursue other options. What other options? The kind that involve federal prosecutors, family court judges, and very public revelations about your character and behavior. The kind that ensure you never get custody or visitation rights with Emma, and that your family and friends understand exactly who you really are. Linda hung up without responding, but Rob knew she called back. She was trapped, isolated, and running out of resources. More importantly, she was finally beginning to understand that she'd seriously underestimated the man she'd betrayed. That night, as Rob tucked Emma into bed, she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Daddy, are you and Linda getting divorced?" Rob sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." Emma nodded solemnly. "Is it because of what happened at Aunt Carol's house?" "That was part of it. But mostly it's because Linda and I want different things, and we can't make each other happy anymore. Will I still get to see her?" Rob studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of distress or attachment that would complicate his decisions. What he saw instead was curiosity mixed with relief. "Do you want to see her?" Emma thought about it seriously. "Maybe sometimes, but not if she's going to be mean to me or make you sad." Rob kissed his daughter's forehead, marveling at her resilience and wisdom. "You know what, Em? I think you and I are going to be just fine on our own." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Rob's phone buzzed with a final message from Maria. "Target accepted meeting for tomorrow morning. She's ready to negotiate." Rob deleted the message and settled into his study to review the divorce papers he'd been preparing for weeks. Linda thought she was walking into negotiations, but she was actually walking into a surrender ceremony. The trap had been set, the prey was cornered, and tomorrow Rob would offer Linda one last choice: accept his terms and disappear quietly, or face the full consequences of betraying a man who never forgot and never forgave. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Linda arrived at the coffee shop on Main Street, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she scanned the room for familiar faces. Maria Santos sat in a corner booth, dressed in a conservative business suit that made her look like a corporate attorney. She'd chosen this location specifically, public enough to feel safe, quiet enough for serious conversation, and close enough to the courthouse to send a subtle message about the legal consequences hovering over Linda's future. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maria said as Linda approached. "Thank you for coming." Linda slid into the booth opposite Maria, her movements sharp with nervous energy. "Where's Rob? My client prefers to handle these matters through representation. I'm Maria Santos, attorney and private investigator. Mr. Mitchell has retained my services to facilitate a clean resolution to your marriage. I want to talk to my husband directly." "That's no longer an option, Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell has presented you with a choice, and you have exactly," Maria checked her watch, 4 hours to make your decision. Linda's composure cracked slightly. "What decision?" Maria opened a thick folder and began laying out documents with methodical precision. Bank records showing Derek's financial crimes. Photographs of Linda entering Derek's office building at suspicious hours. Transcripts of recorded conversations between Linda and Derek discussing their affair and their cruel treatment of Emma. "The choice is simple," Maria continued. "You can sign the divorce agreement we've prepared, which includes very specific terms about your future behavior and your complete surrender of any claims to Mr. Mitchell's assets or custody of Emma. Or you can refuse, and we'll present this evidence in open court while pursuing federal charges against your former lover for financial fraud." Linda stared at the evidence spread across the table, her face cycling through emotions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, something approaching panic. "This is blackmail." "No, Mrs. Mitchell. Blackmail would involve asking you for money or favors in exchange for silence. This is consequences. You committed adultery, conspired to psychologically abuse a child, and aided a man you knew was committing financial crimes. We're offering you a chance to escape those consequences through voluntary compliance." Linda picked up one of the photographs, herself and Derek embracing outside his office, and studied it with growing horror. How long has Rob been watching me? Long enough to document everything. Your husband is very thorough, Mrs. Mitchell. Military training tends to instill that quality. What are the terms? Maria slid a legal document across the table. Complete dissolution of marriage with no financial settlement for you. Mr. Mitchell keeps the house, all bank accounts, investments, and vehicles. You surrender any claim to Emma's custody or visitation. I helped raise that child for 4 years. You participated in her psychological abuse for months, Maria replied coldly. The recordings make that very clear. Linda read through the document, her face growing paler with each page. This leaves me with nothing. It leaves you with your freedom and your anonymity. The alternative is federal prosecution, public humiliation, and complete social destruction. Your choice. What about Derek? What happened to him? Mr. Phillips chose to relocate rather than face the consequences of his actions. A wise decision, all things considered. Linda set down the papers with trembling hands. Rob planned all of this, didn't he? From the moment he found out about the affair. Mr. Mitchell is a strategic thinker. You betrayed his trust and threatened his daughter's well-being. Did you really think he would respond with forgiveness and counseling? Linda laughed bitterly. I thought I knew him. I thought he was just another suburban husband who would fight for his marriage and try to win me back. You misjudged your husband quite severely. What if I refuse to sign? Maria's expression hardened. Then tomorrow morning, federal agents will arrest Derek Phillips for wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. During that investigation, they'll discover evidence of your affair and your knowledge of his crimes. The local newspaper will receive copies of all the evidence, including the recordings where you discuss manipulating Emma and planning to frame your husband for emotional abuse if he discovered your relationship. Linda closed her eyes, understanding that every angle had been covered, every escape route blocked. Your family will learn that you've been lying about your charitable work to cover for your affairs. Your friends will discover that you were planning to destroy your husband's reputation to protect your lover. Emma will see documentation of how you really felt about her, including your statement that she was damaged goods who needed to learn her place. Stop, Linda whispered. And your sister Carol will face investigation for child abuse based on her son's treatment of Emma and her participation in covering for your lies. I understand she's already struggling financially since her divorce. Federal scrutiny would probably destroy what's left of her stability. Linda's hands were shaking openly now. Rob hadn't just planned her destruction. He'd engineered the complete collapse of everyone who'd enabled her betrayal. How do I know Rob will keep his word if I sign this? Because Mr. Mitchell's military record shows he's a man who honors his agreements. Sign the documents, disappear quietly, and you'll never hear from him again. Refuse, and you'll discover exactly what he's capable of when someone threatens his daughter. Linda stared at the divorce papers for a long moment, then picked up the pen Maria offered. Where do I sign? Every page that's marked with an X. Initial each paragraph that outlines your behavioral restrictions. As Linda signed away her marriage, her claims to Emma, and her future in their community, Maria made notes in a separate file. Each signature was being documented, creating an unbreakable legal record of Linda's voluntary surrender. There's one final matter, Maria said when Linda finished signing. Mr. Mitchell wants you to understand something clearly. What? If you ever attempt to contact Emma through social media, mail, phone calls, or any third party, Mr. Mitchell will consider that a violation of this agreement. If you ever return to this area or attempt to interfere in Emma's life in any way, the protection this document provides will be null and void. Linda nodded numbly. And Mrs. Mitchell? Mr. Mitchell wants you to know that he'll be monitoring your activities for the foreseeable future, not out of lingering attachment, but out of paternal responsibility. If you ever put another child at risk the way you put Emma at risk, he'll ensure the appropriate authorities are notified. Linda stood to leave, moving like a woman who'd aged years in the span of an hour. At the door, she turned back to Maria with one final question. Will you tell Rob something for me? If it's appropriate, tell him I'm sorry. Not about the affair, that was my choice, but about Emma. She deserved better from me. Linda walked out of the coffee shop and out of Rob and Emma's lives forever. Maria watched through the window as Linda got in her car and drove away, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she'd been completely, methodically destroyed by a man she'd thought she could manipulate. Maria gathered the signed documents and called Rob. It's done. She signed everything and she's gone. Any problems? None. She understood exactly what was at stake. Oh, and Rob? She asked me to tell you she was sorry about Emma. Rob was quiet for a moment. Too little, too late. What now? Now, I go home to my daughter and we start over. Clean slate, no looking back. And Linda? Linda made her choices. She'll live with the consequences. As Maria drove toward the courthouse to file the divorce papers, Rob was picking up Emma from school. His daughter ran toward him with the unburdened joy of a child who sensed that whatever dark cloud had been hanging over their family was finally lifting. How was school, sweetheart? Rob asked as Emma buckled her seatbelt. Good. Mrs. Peterson said I could be in the advanced reading group next semester. And guess what? Sarah's mom invited me to their family camping trip next month. Rob smiled, hearing excitement in Emma's voice that had been missing for weeks. That sounds like fun. We'll talk to Sarah's mom about the details. Daddy, are you happy today? Rob looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, seeing her bright eyes and genuine smile. Yes, Em. I'm very happy today. Me too. I feel like everything's going to be okay now. Everything's going to be better than okay, Rob promised. Everything's going to be perfect. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Rob stood in the kitchen of their remodeled home, watching Emma practice piano in the living room. The house felt different now. Lighter, warmer, filled with the kind of genuine happiness that couldn't be manufactured or performed. They'd rearranged furniture, painted walls, and created new traditions that belonged entirely to them. Emma had thrived since Linda's departure in ways that surprised even Rob. Her grades improved, she made new friends, and the quiet anxiety that had shadowed her for months gradually disappeared. Most importantly, she'd stopped walking on eggshells, stopped trying to anticipate adult moods and reactions. Daddy, did I tell you what happened at lunch today? Emma called from the piano bench. No, sweetheart. What happened? Mason tried to take my cookies, so I told him my dad was a soldier and he'd better give them back. Emma grinned. He gave them back really fast. Rob laughed. Em, you can't use my military background to intimidate kids into sharing their lunch. Why not? It worked. Because it's not fair to use fear to get what you want. Emma considered this seriously. But what if someone's being mean and they won't stop? Then you use your words first, get help from a teacher second, and only defend yourself physically if absolutely necessary. What if all of those don't work? Rob set down his coffee and joined Emma at the piano. Then you tell me, and I'll handle it. Like you handled Linda and Derek? The question caught Rob off guard. They rarely talked about Linda anymore, and Emma had never mentioned Derek by name before. What do you mean, sweetheart? I know they were being mean to you and to me, and I know you made them go away. Sarah's mom told her mom that you were a hero for protecting me. Rob felt a complex mix of pride and concern. He'd been careful to shield Emma from the details of Linda's departure, but apparently their small community had drawn its own conclusions about the sudden end of his marriage. Emma, I need you to understand something important. What happened with Linda wasn't about being a hero. It was about making sure you're safe and happy. I know. That's what dads do, right? Protect their kids. That's exactly what dads do. Emma returned to her piano practice, but Rob continued to think about their conversation. The truth was that the last 6 months had been a revelation. Without Linda's subtle manipulations and manufactured drama, both he and Emma had discovered aspects of themselves they'd forgotten or never known existed. Rob had started dating again, cautiously, with Emma's well-being as his primary consideration. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, Emma's pediatrician, had expressed interest during a routine appointment, and their first coffee date had turned into weekly dinners that Emma sometimes joined. Jennifer understood the complexity of dating a single father with a protective nature, and she seemed genuinely fond of Emma rather than merely tolerating her. More importantly, Rob had reconnected with parts of himself that Linda's presence had somehow stifled. He'd started a small consulting business, helping other veterans transition to civilian careers. He coached Emma's soccer team. He'd even begun teaching a self-defense class at the community center, primarily for women and children. The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Rob opened it to find Maria Santos holding a bottle of wine and wearing a rare smile. "This is unexpected," Rob said. "Come in." Maria entered and waved at Emma, who waved back before returning to her piano. "I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I had some news I thought you'd want to hear in person." They sat in the kitchen while Emma's piano music provided a cheerful background. Maria poured herself coffee from the pot Rob offered and settled back in her chair. "Derek Phillips was arrested in Nevada 3 weeks ago," she began. "Turns out he tried to restart his accounting practice using forged credentials. The Nevada State Board of Accountancy ran a routine background check and discovered his history. Is he facing charges? Multiple federal charges. Tax fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and violation of his professional license restrictions. He's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum." Rob felt a grim satisfaction. Derek had been given a chance to disappear and start over honestly, but his fundamental nature had reasserted itself. Some people never learn from consequences. What about Linda? That's the interesting part. Linda's been living in Phoenix under her maiden name, working as a receptionist at a dental office. No criminal activity, no attempts to contact you or Emma, no social media presence. She's essentially vanished from her old life completely. Rob nodded. Linda had kept her end of the agreement, which was more than he'd expected given her manipulative nature. "There's more," Maria continued. "Carol contacted my office last week. Her boys are in therapy for behavioral problems, and she wanted to apologize to you and Emma for what happened at her house." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that apologies are meaningless without changed behavior, and that any contact with your family would need to go through me first." She understood. Emma finished her piano practice and joined them in the kitchen, climbing into the chair next to Rob. "Are you talking about grown-up stuff?" "We are," Rob said, "but we're almost finished. Can I listen?" Rob looked at Maria, who shrugged. "It's your call." "Emma, Maria is telling me that some people who weren't very nice to us before are being held responsible for their choices. Like when kids at school get in trouble for bullying." Emma nodded seriously. "Good. People should get in trouble when they're mean. But here's the important part," Rob continued. "We don't spend our time thinking about those people anymore. We focus on our life, our happiness, and the people who treat us well. Like Jennifer and her kids?" Rob smiled. Emma had taken to Jennifer's twin daughters immediately, and the four of them had formed an easy friendship that was slowly developing into something deeper. Exactly like Jennifer and her kids. Maria finished her coffee and prepared to leave. At the door, she turned back to Rob with a final observation. "You know, in all my years doing this kind of work, I've never seen someone implement such a comprehensive response to betrayal. Most people want revenge that's quick and visible. What you did was create long-term consequences that taught real lessons." "I wasn't trying to teach lessons," Rob replied. "I was trying to protect Emma. Same thing in this case. Emma learned that the adults in her life will fight for her. Derek learned that actions have consequences. Linda learned that manipulation has limits. And your community learned that you're not someone to underestimate." After Maria left, Rob and Emma spent the evening cooking dinner together, a new tradition they'd established to end each day. Emma chattered about school, friends, and her plans for the weekend, her voice bright with the confidence of a child who felt completely secure. As they sat down to eat, Emma asked one final question about the conversation with Maria. "Daddy, are you glad Linda's gone?" Rob considered his answer carefully. "I'm glad we're both safe and happy, Em. I'm glad you don't have to worry about adults being unfair to you. And I'm glad it's just you and me figuring out our life together. What if you get married again someday? If I do, it will be to someone who loves you as much as I do and who makes our family stronger, not weaker." Emma smiled. "Like Jennifer?" "Maybe like Jennifer. But that's a decision we'd make together as a team." "I like being on your team, Daddy." "I like being on your team too, sweetheart." As they finished dinner and began their evening cleanup routine, Rob reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been a man discovering that his marriage was built on lies and his daughter was being systematically destroyed by people who claimed to love her. Today, he was a father who had eliminated every threat to his child's well-being and built a life foundation strong enough to support whatever future they chose to create together. Linda was in Phoenix, living with the consequences of her choices. Derek was in prison, learning that charm couldn't overcome criminal behavior. Carol was in therapy with her sons, hopefully learning to be a better parent and person. And Rob and Emma were home, safe, happy, and free to write the next chapter of their story however they chose. Rob had kept his promise to himself and to Emma. He had protected what mattered most, eliminated what threatened them, and never compromised his principles in the process. Some men forgive and forget. Others ensure that forgiveness becomes unnecessary because threats simply cease to exist. Rob Mitchell had chosen the latter path, and both he and Emma were stronger for it. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and secured by the unshakable foundation Rob had built through strength, planning, and the absolute refusal to let anyone hurt his daughter ever again. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Perfect Day. Blake Cole raised a champagne glass and surveyed the ballroom with quiet satisfaction. 200 guests filled the Hilton's grand reception hall, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of joy that made the past 6 months of wedding planning worthwhile. His daughter Charlotte, radiant in her ivory gown, was dancing with her new husband Sean Ford, both of them glowing with that particular happiness that belongs only to newlyweds. Beautiful, isn't it? Carol, Blake's wife of 30 years, slipped her hand into his. Her eyes were misty with the kind of tears mothers shed at their daughters' weddings. Perfect, Blake agreed. He'd always been a man of few words, methodical in his thoughts and precise in his speech, traits that serve him well in his career as a civil engineer. But tonight, emotion threatened to crack his carefully maintained composure. The wedding toast was his responsibility, and as the band transitioned to a softer melody, Blake tapped his glass to quiet the crowd. Faces turned toward him expectantly. Family, friends, colleagues from his firm. Good people, all of them. People he'd protect with his life. Most of you know I'm not much for speeches, Blake began, earning a few chuckles from those who knew him well. I build bridges, design foundations, solve problems with mathematics and physics. But standing here tonight, watching my daughter marry this young man. He paused, glancing at Sean, who nervously straightened his bow tie. I'm reminded that the strongest structures aren't always made of steel and concrete. They're made of love, commitment, and family. The crowd murmured appreciation, and Blake continued. 8 years ago, I lost my brother Victor in a car accident. He was supposed to be here tonight, supposed to be my best man like I was his. Victor was a journalist, always chasing truth, always looking out for people who couldn't protect themselves. Blake's voice caught slightly. He would have loved this day. So Charlotte, Sean, this toast is for both of you and in memory of Uncle Victor. May your foundation together be unshakable. Glasses clinked throughout the room as guests echoed the toast. Charlotte wiped away tears and mouthed, "I love you, Dad," across the dance floor. The reception continued with increasing energy as the night deepened. By 1:45 a.m., Blake had loosened his tie and was contemplating the comfortable bed waiting in their hotel suite upstairs. Most guests had departed, but close family remained. Carol's sister Lorena and her husband, a few of Charlotte's college friends, and Sean's parents who'd flown in from Oregon. Blake stepped out onto the hotel's terrace for some air. The October night was crisp, and downtown Chicago sparkled below him. He thought about Victor, as he often did during significant family moments. His younger brother had been brilliant, fearless in ways Blake never was. Victor pursued danger while Blake calculated risks. Victor exposed corruption while Blake built skyscrapers. They'd been opposites who completed each other. The explosion that killed Victor had never sat right with Blake. The police called it a car malfunction, faulty gas line ignited by a spark. But Victor had just bought that car. And in his last phone call to Blake, 2 hours before he died, Victor had sounded scared. He'd said something about uncovering something big and promised to tell Blake everything the next day. That next day never came. Blake shook off the dark memories and checked his watch. 1:58 a.m. Time to call it a night. He headed back inside, navigating through the thinning crowd toward Carol, who was helping Charlotte gather her gifts. Then his phone rang. Blake glanced at the screen and felt the blood drain from his face. The caller ID displayed a name that shouldn't exist, Victor Barry. His brother's number, the one that had been disconnected 8 years ago, that Blake had never been able to bring himself to delete from his contacts. With trembling hands, Blake answered. Hello. Blake. The voice was hoarse, aged, but unmistakable. Where are you right now? Blake's mind reeled. Hallucination? Prank? Impossible. Who is this? It's me, brother. Where are you? I'm at the Hilton. The downtown Hilton. Victor? How are you? Listen carefully. The voice was urgent, desperate. Is the whole family there? Yes. We're at Charlotte's wedding reception. Victor, how are you calling me? You died 8 years. Get everyone out of that building in 60 seconds. Blake froze. What? 60 seconds, Blake. Don't use the exits. They're rigged. Windows, fire escapes, anything but the main doors. I'll explain later. Move now. Victor, I don't understand. You don't have time. Victor's scream was primal, terrified. 50 seconds. I said now. Every instinct Blake had developed over 3 decades of engineering, of calculating stress points, anticipating failures, preparing for worst-case scenarios, suddenly activated. He didn't understand what was happening, but he recognized that tone. His brother wasn't joking. Blake sprinted toward the bandstand. Chapter 2, 60 seconds. Blake vaulted onto the small stage with surprising agility for a 53-year-old man, ripping the microphone from the confused band leader's hands. His engineering mind was already calculating. 45 seconds remaining, approximately 60 people still in the ballroom, 4 fire escape exits, 2 emergency window ladders. Everybody listen. His voice boomed through the speakers, silencing all conversation. Confused faces turned toward him. This is not a drill. There's a gas leak in the main structure. We need to evacuate immediately. Do not use the main exits. Carol stared at him, confusion and trust warring on her face. Charlotte clutched Sean's arm. Blake locked eyes with his daughter and put every ounce of authority into his voice. Windows and fire escapes only. Move quickly, but don't panic. Hotel staff, open those emergency window exits now. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Carol, bless her, understood that her husband of 30 years wouldn't do this without reason. You heard him. Charlotte, Sean, fire escape now. She began herding people toward the emergency exits. 30 seconds. Lorena grabbed her husband's arm and ran. Sean's father, a retired fire chief, immediately grasped the situation and began directing people with professional efficiency. 2 lines. Fire escapes on both sides. Leave everything. Guests abandoned champagne glasses and gift bags, moving with increasing urgency toward the emergency exits. The hotel staff, trained for such scenarios even if confused about the source, activated the window ladders and began assisting elderly guests. 20 seconds. Blake jumped off the stage and physically pushed people toward the exits. Faster. Come on. A bridesmaid in heels stumbled. Blake caught her and propelled her forward. The ballroom was clearing rapidly now, the crowd funneling through 4 different escape routes. Blake! Carol was at the East Fire Escape, holding the door open. Charlotte's out. Come on. Go. I'm checking for stragglers. Blake sprinted through the ballroom, checking behind the bar, under tables and the restrooms. Empty. Everyone was out. 10 seconds. Blake ran for the fire escape, where Carol had exited. His dress, shoes slipped on the polished floor, and he crashed into a table, sending centerpieces flying. Pain shot through his ribs, but he pushed forward. 5 seconds. He burst through the fire escape door, Carol reaching back for him from 3 floors below on the external steel staircase. "Jump!" she screamed. Blake leaped down half a flight of stairs, his hand grabbing the cold metal railing. 0. The explosion was apocalyptic. The entire front facade of the Hilton's 5th floor erupted outward in a cascade of glass, steel, and fire. The main ballroom entrances, both the grand double doors and the service corridors, detonated simultaneously in perfectly timed charges that sent debris raining down onto Michigan Avenue. The shockwave hit Blake like a physical punch, throwing him against the fire escape railing. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. Below him, Carol screamed his name, but he couldn't hear her. He could only watch in horror as flames engulfed what had been, seconds ago, a celebration of love and family. The fire escape shuddered under their feet. Blake's engineering instincts kicked in through the shock. External structure, bolted to brick, probably stable, but get everyone down now. He grabbed Carol's hand and descended, half running, half falling down the steel steps. At ground level, chaos reigned. Wedding guests and formal were stood on the sidewalk, some bleeding from minor cuts, all in various states of shock. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Charlotte sobbed in Sean's arms while Lorena frantically counted heads, making sure everyone had made it out. Blake's hearing slowly returned, the ringing fading to reveal screams, crackling flames, and the approaching emergency vehicles. Carol clutched his arm, her face pale. "Blake, how did you know? What gas leak? How?" "Victor called me." Carol's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "What?" "Blake, Victor's been dead for 8 years." "I know what I heard, Carol." It was his voice. His number. Blake pulled out his phone with shaking hands to show her, but the screen was cracked from his fall, the phone dead. "Dad!" Charlotte pushed through the crowd, Sean close behind. She threw her arms around Blake, trembling. "Dad, you saved us. You saved everyone. How did you know?" Blake held his daughter tight, his mind racing. Over her shoulder, he scanned the growing crowd of onlookers, the arriving fire trucks, the police establishing a perimeter. He was looking for something, someone he knew had to be there. Then he saw him. Across the street, half hidden in the shadow of an office building, stood a figure Blake would recognize anywhere despite the years, despite the scars, despite the impossibility. Victor Barry was watching them, very much alive. Their eyes met across the chaos. Victor nodded once, then melted back into the shadows. Blake's entire world tilted on its axis. His brother was alive. Someone had just tried to murder his entire family, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 3. Ghost Protocol. Blake waited until the immediate chaos subsided before making his move. The fire department had the blaze under control, and the police were beginning to take statements from shaken guests. He'd already given his account, sanitized, edited, making no mention of mysterious phone calls from dead brothers. Just a concerned father with a gut feeling about a gas leak. The police accepted his story with the gratitude of men who'd just avoided a mass casualty event. "I need to check on something at the car," Blake told Carol quietly. "Stay with Charlotte." Carol grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Blake Cole, don't you dare leave us after what just happened. 5 minutes. I promise." He kissed her forehead. "Trust me." Her eyes searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her nod. 5 minutes. Then I'm sending Sean's dad to find you." Blake navigated through the emergency vehicles and crossed the street, heading toward the shadowed alcove where he'd seen Victor disappear. His heart hammered in his chest. 8 years. 8 years of grief, of wondering what Victor's last moments had been like, of missed conversations and lost brotherhood. Over here. The voice came from a service alley between 2 office buildings. Blake turned to see his brother step into the dim light cast by a distant street lamp, and his breath caught. Victor had aged decades in 8 years. Deep scars ran down the left side of his face. His hair was shot through with premature gray, and he moved with a slight limp. But his eyes, sharp, intelligent, haunted, were unmistakably Victor's. "You're alive." Blake's voice cracked on the words. Not quite the reunion I imagined, Victor said with a ghost of his old smile. But we don't have time for sentiment. They'll be looking for survivors, confirming kills. We need to move your family now. We? They? Blake felt anger rising through his shock. Victor, you've been dead for 8 years. I warned you. Mom died thinking she'd lost her youngest son, and now you show up, my daughter's wedding explodes, and you want me to just... Blake! Victor stepped closer, and Blake saw the pain etched in every line of his face. You think I don't know what I cost you? Why cost all of you? I died every day for 8 years knowing you were all suffering because of choices I made. But I didn't have a choice. Not if I wanted you to actually stay alive. Blake's fists clenched. Explain. Now. Victor glanced over his shoulder, then back at Blake. Not here. Get your family. Carol, Charlotte, Sean, Lorena, and her husband, anyone who was staying at the hotel. Tell them there's been a secondary gas threat, and the police want everyone relocated. Bring them to the Marriott on Harrison Street, room 412. I'll be waiting. And Blake. Victor's expression turned deadly serious. Don't tell anyone I'm alive. Not yet. Not until I explain everything. I'm not taking my family anywhere until you tell me who just tried to kill them. Victor's jaw tightened. Gerard Daniels. The name meant nothing to Blake. Who? The man who killed me 8 years ago. Victor's eyes went cold. Or tried to. The man who just tried to finish what he started by taking out my entire family in one coordinated strike. A man who runs the largest human trafficking operation in the Midwest, and who I'm about to destroy. Blake staggered back. Human trafficking? Victor, what the hell did you get involved in? My job. Victor's voice was bitter. I was a journalist, remember? I investigated the story everyone else was too scared to touch. And now that story's coming full circle. Marriott, room 412, 30 minutes. Bring the family. I'll tell you everything. All the things I should have told you 8 years ago. Before Blake could respond, Victor had vanished into the alley's darkness, moving with a practiced stealth that spoke of years spent hiding in shadows. 35 minutes later, Blake herded his confused and frightened family into a nondescript hotel room across town. Carol had stopped asking questions after Blake's whispered confession in the car, Victor's alive. Now she sat on the bed, holding Charlotte's hand, her face pale but determined. Sean stood protectively near his new wife, while Lorena and her husband Dan kept glancing nervously at the door. Blake had told them the minimum, a credible threat, police precaution, everyone needed to stay together tonight. A soft knock, then Victor entered using a keycard. The room fell silent. Holy Christ, Lorena breathed. Victor? Charlotte gasped. Carol's eyes filled with tears. Dan reached for his phone instinctively. Don't, Victor said quietly, his hand raised. Please. No calls, no photos, no social media. For your own safety, I need you all to understand. As far as the world is concerned, I'm still dead. Mom died thinking you were gone, Carol said, her voice shaking with suppressed emotion. Blake's been carrying that loss for 8 years. And now you just show up? Expect us to understand. No. Victor's voice broke. I don't expect understanding. I expect you to be angry. But I'm praying you'll listen because your lives depend on it. Blake moved to the center of the room. Then talk. Tell us everything. And it better be the truth, Victor, or so help me. It is. Victor sat heavily in a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. 8 years ago, I was investigating a story about missing women. Young women, mostly immigrants, who were disappearing from Chicagoland without a trace. The police weren't interested. Transient population, people assumed they'd moved on. But I found a pattern. He pulled out a worn folder from his jacket, spreading photos across the hotel desk. Blake recognized his brother's old methodology, the obsessive documentation, the connecting threads. Gerard Daniels, successful businessman, philanthropist, runs the Daniels Foundation, supposedly helping at-risk youth. In reality, he's been running a trafficking operation for 15 years. The foundation is a hunting ground. He identifies vulnerable women, promises them help, then ships them to buyers across the country. Maybe international. I never got that far in the investigation. Jesus, Sean breathed. Victor continued, his voice mechanical, as if reciting facts was easier than confronting the emotion. I got too close. I had evidence, testimony from 2 survivors who escaped. I was about to publish the story, blow the whole operation wide open. That's when Gerard came after me. The car bomb, Blake said quietly. Professionally done. Military-grade explosives, remote trigger. I was supposed to be vaporized. No body, no questions. But I saw the guy placing the device under my car when I came back from lunch. I ran. The detonation happened while I was 2 blocks away, but the explosion threw me through a storefront window. Victor traced the scars on his face. Spent 3 weeks in an underground clinic, paid for by a contact who owed me a favor. While I could think straight again, I realized Gerard would come after everyone I cared about to tie up loose ends. My sources, my editor, and especially my family. Carol made a soft sound of horror. So I died, Victor said simply. My contact arranged the cover story, made sure the authorities found enough evidence in the wreckage to confirm Victor Barry was gone. I went underground, spent 8 years watching Gerard from the shadows, gathering more evidence, trying to find a way to stop him that wouldn't put all of you in the crosshairs. But you called tonight, Blake said. You knew he was coming for us. How? Victor's expression turned grim. Because 3 weeks ago, Gerard discovered I was alive. One of his men spotted me doing surveillance. Gerard realized I'd been building a case against him all these years, and he decided to eliminate the only threat that matters, the people I love. He figured if he couldn't find me, he'd draw me out by destroying my family. The wedding was a perfect opportunity. Public venue, everyone together, maximum impact. Charlotte made a strangled sound. He tried to kill all of us? Because of you. The accusation hung in the air. Victor flinched but didn't look away. Yes, and I take full responsibility. But right now we don't have time for guilt. Gerard knows the attack failed. His men will have reported that casualties were minimal. He'll regroup, come at us differently, which means we have a narrow window to act. Act. Blake's voice was sharp. Act how? We go to the police, FBI, whoever handles this. Gerard owns half the cops in 3 counties. Victor interrupted. His foundation donates millions to politicians. He's got judges, prosecutors, even some FBI contacts in his pocket. I've tried the official channels for 8 years. Every piece of evidence mysteriously disappears. Every witness recants or vanishes. The system is built to protect men like Gerard Daniels. Then what? Carol demanded. We run? Hide? Live the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? No. Victor met his brother's eyes. We do what I should have done 8 years ago. We destroy him completely. But I can't do it alone. Blake, I need your help. Blake looked at his wife, his daughter, his family. All of them looking to him for answers, for protection, for a solution to a nightmare that had invaded their lives. 8 years ago, he'd lost his brother. Tonight, he nearly lost everything. He thought about foundations, how he'd spent his career building structures that could withstand tremendous pressure, that protected the people inside from external threats. His family was his foundation, and that foundation had just come under attack. Blake Cole wasn't a soldier or a spy. He was an engineer, but engineers solve problems. They analyzed weaknesses, calculated solutions, and built things that lasted. Tell me everything, Blake said quietly. Every detail about Gerard Daniels, his operation, his weaknesses, and then we're going to do what I do best. Victor leaned forward. What's that? Blake's expression hardened. We're going to bring his entire foundation crashing down. Chapter 4, Sins of the Past. The hotel room transformed into a makeshift command center as Victor spread out 8 years of accumulated evidence. Blake sent Charlotte, Carol, and the others to get some rest in an adjoining room. What they were about to discuss wasn't for everyone's ears. Start from the beginning, Blake said, settling into investigator mode. Not the sanitized version. Everything. Victor took a breath and began to unspool the full story. It started with a missing persons case in 2017. A college student named Maria Torres vanished from Northwestern's campus. Her roommate told police Maria had been excited about a volunteer opportunity with some youth foundation. Police wrote it off as a runaway situation, but the roommate came to me because she'd seen my series on immigration issues. He pulled out a photo of a young woman with bright eyes and a warm smile. Maria was never seen again. But when I started digging, I found 6 other women with similar stories over 3 years, all approached by representatives from the Daniels Foundation, all promised jobs or education opportunities, all vanished. Blake studied the photographs Victor laid out. Young women, most of them in their late teens or early 20s, all with similar vulnerable circumstances. His stomach churned. Gerard Daniels inherited his father's construction company at 25. Victor continued, turned it into a multi-million-dollar empire. By 30, he'd started the foundation supposedly to give back. That's when the disappearances started. He uses the foundation's outreach programs to identify targets, young women who are isolated, maybe undocumented, definitely desperate. His people offer help, then deliver them straight into the trafficking pipeline. How does he move them without being caught? Construction company, Victor said grimly. Gerard still owns Daniels Construction. They've got contracts all over the Midwest, office buildings, industrial parks, residential developments. He uses construction trucks, supposedly moving equipment and materials. Who checks what's in a construction vehicle? He's got regular routes, legitimate business covering his transport network. Blake's engineering mind immediately grasped the elegance of the scheme. He uses the construction logistics as cover. Different sites in different cities, constantly moving legitimate paperwork. Exactly. By the time I figured it out, I'd identified at least 23 victims over 6 years. But I couldn't prove the connection between the missing women and Gerard directly. Then I found Brittany. Victor pulled out another photo, this one showing a woman with haunted eyes and a defiant expression. Brittany Sanford. She escaped from one of Gerard's holding facilities, an abandoned warehouse his company supposedly owned for equipment storage. She made it to a women's shelter, scared out of her mind, but willing to talk. She gave me everything. Descriptions of Gerard's men, details about the operation, even saw Gerard himself once when he came to inspect his merchandise. Blake felt rage building in his chest. Where is she now? Victor's silence was answer enough. Gerard found her 3 days before I was going to publish. Victor said quietly. Made it look like an overdose. That's when I knew I was playing against someone with reach and resources beyond anything I'd anticipated. When the car bomb happened 2 days later, I understood Gerard didn't just want the story killed. He wanted everyone connected to it erased. So you fake your death to protect us. I didn't have a choice, Blake. If Gerard thought I had family who might continue my investigation, he'd have killed you, Carol, Mom, all of you. At least if I was dead, you were safe. Gerard had no reason to come after you, until he discovered you were alive. Victor nodded. 3 weeks ago, I got careless, thought I'd covered my tracks better. One of Gerard's men spotted me photographing a warehouse transfer. They traced my safe house, found my research. Gerard realized I'd spent 8 years building an even bigger case against him. Blake stood and paced the room, his mind processing the information. You said you tried official channels. What happened? Everything disappeared. I'd compile evidence, create anonymous tips, feed information to FBI, field offices, state police, anyone who might act. But Gerard's got people everywhere. Evidence vanishes from evidence lockers. Witnesses change their stories. Investigations get quietly closed. The few honest cops who try to pursue it found themselves transferred or pressured to back off. What about federal agencies? Surely trafficking investigation units are underfunded and overwhelmed, Victor finished. And Gerard's smart. His foundation donates to the right causes, shows up at the right charity galas, has photos with senators and governors. He's built a public image of a philanthropist while running an empire built on human suffering. The few times anyone got close, his lawyers buried them in paperwork and defamation threats. Blake stopped pacing. You mentioned he was planning to leave the country? In 1 week. Gerard's made his money. The attention is getting too hot, and now with me alive and his attempted hit failing, he knows his time is running out. He's got a final shipment scheduled, 12 women already acquired, being held at a facility I haven't been able to locate. After that delivery, he disappears to a country with no extradition treaty, living like a king off his blood money. So we have 1 week. Less. After tonight's failure, Gerard will accelerate his timeline. He'll try to tie up loose ends, meaning us, while finalizing his exit. Victor met his brother's eyes. Blake, I know what I'm asking. You got a family, a career, a life. You shouldn't have to. He tried to murder my daughter on her wedding day. Blake interrupted, his voice cold. He's destroyed dozens of women's lives. And he took 8 years of my brother's life. So don't tell me what I should or shouldn't do. Victor's expression softened with gratitude. What are you thinking? Blake moved to the desk, studying the map of Gerard's known properties that Victor had compiled. His engineers, I immediately began analyzing patterns, identifying weaknesses. You've been investigating Gerard like a journalist, gathering evidence, looking for proof. That's why you failed. Then how do we approach it? Blake's smile was cold. We treat him like a structural problem. Every building has a failure point. Every foundation has a weakness. We find Gerard's critical vulnerabilities, and we apply pressure until his entire operation collapses. But first, we need to understand the full structure of what we're dealing with. He turned to his brother. I need everything you have, property records, financial documents, personnel files, delivery schedules, every scrap of information you've collected. And then I need to make some calls. Calls to who? I've spent 30 years designing buildings all over Chicago. I know contractors, developers, city inspectors, people who know which projects are legitimate and which are fronts. Gerard uses construction as cover? Then it's time to take advantage of my connections in that industry. For the first time in 8 years, something like hope flickered in Victor's eyes. You really think we can stop him? Blake thought about Charlotte's face twisted in fear, about all the women whose photos covered the desk, about his brother's scars and lost years. Gerard Daniels built his empire by hiding in plain sight, using legitimate business to cover monstrous crimes. But every structure has its load-bearing elements. We identify them, remove them systematically, and watch everything come crashing down. And if he comes after the family again? Blake's expression hardened. Then he'll discover that protecting my foundation is what I do best. And I don't fail at my job. Chapter 5. The Devil's Network. Blake spent the next 6 hours making calls, reaching out to contacts he'd built over 3 decades in Chicago's construction industry. By noon the following day, he'd assembled a clearer picture of Gerard Daniels' operation than Victor had managed in 8 years. He's got 12 major properties that route through his logistics network. Blake explained to Victor over coffee in the hotel room. Carol had taken Charlotte and the others to a separate safe location, a colleague's vacant condo downtown that Blake had secured. 8 are legitimate construction sites, but 4 are suspicious. Warehouses supposedly for equipment storage that see unusual night activity. Victor leaned over the marked-up map. These locations? Industrial District on the south side, 2 near O'Hare, 1 in Gary, Indiana, just across the state line. My contact at the city inspection office flagged them. Minimal legitimate activity, but power usage suggests regular occupation. Holding facilities. Victor's voice was grim. Most likely, but there's something else. Blake pulled up a property record on his laptop. Gerard filed permits last month for equipment transfer to a private airfield in Joliet. My friend at the county planning office says the permit includes transport of secured containers. Victor's eyes widened. The final shipment. That's how he's moving them out before he flees. Which means the women are probably already being held somewhere nearby, ready for transport. Blake's jaw tightened. We need to find that facility. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Blake answered cautiously. Hello, Mr. Cole. The voice was professional, female. This is Detective Megan Rhodes with CPD. I'm calling about the incident at the Hilton last night. I need to ask you some follow-up questions. Blake's eyes met Victor's, who immediately tensed. Of course, Detective. Is there a problem? Just some inconsistencies we're trying to resolve. Security footage shows you received a phone call immediately before the evacuation. Could you tell me about that call? Blake's mind raced. Just my wife, checking on something from the hotel suite. Interesting. Because your wife's phone records show no call to your number at that time. And the ballroom's cellular log captured an incoming call from a number registered to your deceased brother, Victor Barry. Can you explain that? The room went silent. Victor was already moving, gathering his evidence into a go bag. Detective Blake said carefully, "I'm not sure what technical glitch you're seeing, but my brother died 8 years ago. Perhaps there's a number reassignment issue." Perhaps. Rhodes didn't sound convinced. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to need you to come down to the station for a formal statement." "Where are you currently?" "I'm with my family at a private location. After last night's trauma, we felt safer away from the hotel." "I understand. I'll need that address." Blake made a decision. "Detective, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I'm not comfortable giving our location over the phone after someone just tried to blow up my daughter's wedding. If you'd like to meet somewhere public." The line went dead. Blake slowly lowered the phone. "We've got a problem. Rhodes is one of Gerard's people," Victor said, already halfway to the door. "I've seen her name in connection to several closed investigations. She's probably tracking this call. Might have already triangulated our location. Then we move." Now, Blake grabbed his jacket and the evidence Victor had collected. "But first, we warned Carol and Charlotte. If Gerard's people tracked us, they'll be looking for them too." They made it to the parking garage when Blake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know you're helping your dead brother. Smart move saving everyone last night. But now you've made this personal. We have unfinished business, Mr. Cole. Let's resolve it like gentlemen." Below the text was a photo that made Blake's blood run cold. Charlotte, Carol, Sean, and Lorena walking down a street near the condo. Someone was following them. Someone very close. "They found them," Blake breathed. Victor grabbed the phone, his face draining of color. "That's near the safe house." "Blake, we need to." Blake was already running for his car, Victor close behind. They peeled out of the parking garage, Blake's hands white-knuckled on the wheel as he navigated Chicago traffic with controlled aggression. "Call Carol," Blake ordered. "Tell her to get everyone inside. Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone." Victor made the call, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried Charlotte's phone. Same result. They're not answering. Blake's mind was calculating. 15 minutes to the condo in traffic. Maybe 10 if he pushed it. Too long. Gerard's people were already there. Had probably been watching the building waiting for Victor and Blake to show up. "We're walking into a trap," Victor said quietly. "I know." Blake's jaw was set. "But they've got my family. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Blake, if we go in there, Gerard will have us all. We should call the real police, FBI, someone. And by the time they decide whether or not to believe us, my wife and daughter are dead." Blake's voice was cold. "No, we go in, but we go in smart." He pulled over 2 blocks from the condo and killed the engine. From the glove compartment, he retrieved a small toolbox, the engineer's emergency kit he always carried. Basic tools: flashlight, utility knife, some wire. Victor watched him with surprise. "You planning to build our way out?" "I'm planning to use what I know." Blake's mind was already analyzing the condo building structure. He consulted on its design 3 years ago, knew its layout intimately. The building has a service entrance that connects to the parking garage through a maintenance corridor. We can get in without using the main entrance. And then what? Then we see what Gerard really wants. Blake met his brother's eyes. He could have killed them already if that was his goal. He wants us, which means he'll negotiate. And while he's talking, I'll be looking for weaknesses in his position. "You sound like you've done this before." "I haven't. But every negotiation is about leverage. We find ours, we survive. We don't. We at least go down protecting our family." They approached the building from the back, using the service entrance. Blake remembered. The door was unlocked, a bad sign, meant for their access. Someone was expecting them. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit and empty. Blake led the way, moving as silently as possible, his heart hammering. Behind him, Victor moved like a ghost. Years of hiding having taught him stealth Blake couldn't match. They reached the residential hallway. Blake could see the condo door, apartment 412, standing slightly ajar. Another invitation. Another trap. Blake tested the adjacent apartment's door. Locked. He pulled out his utility knife and a length of wire, manipulating the simple lock with practiced efficiency, a skill he'd picked up during his early career doing building inspections. The apartment was empty, recently vacated by the look of it. Blake moved to the adjoining wall with the target condo and pressed his ear against it. Voices. He could hear Gerard Daniels speaking, his tone cultured and reasonable, and Carol's voice, tight with controlled fear, answering his questions. "Can you see anything through the wall?" Victor whispered. Blake shook his head. But then he remembered, during the building's design phase, they'd included modular wall panels for easy utility access. He ran his hands along the wall's surface until he found what he was looking for, a removable access panel, painted over but still functional. Working quietly, Blake used his tools to loosen the panel, revealing a narrow gap between walls for electrical conduits. Through the gap, he could see into the adjoining condo. The sight made his blood boil. Carol, Charlotte, Sean, Lorena, and Dan were seated on the living room couch, watched by three armed men. And standing in the center of the room, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit, was Gerard Daniels himself. Gerard was in his early 50s, handsome in a cold way, his silver hair styled perfectly. He held a glass of what looked like expensive scotch and was speaking to Carol with the casual friendliness of a dinner party host. "Unnecessarily dramatic, don't you think?" Gerard was saying. "I simply wanted to have a conversation with your husband and his brother. After all, Victor and I have unfinished business, and Blake has now inserted himself into our little dispute by saving his family from your bomb." Carol's voice was sharp despite her fear. Gerard smiled. "A misunderstanding. Things escalated beyond my original intent. I'm actually quite impressed with Blake's quick thinking. Civilian engineers don't typically demonstrate such crisis management skills. It suggests your husband has hidden depths, Mrs. Cole." Blake watched through the narrow gap, his mind racing. 3 armed men, Gerard, 5 hostages. Direct assault was suicide. But the room's layout. He studied the structure, the support beams visible through the walls, the emergency sprinkler system, the electrical panel near the door. Victor touched his shoulder and mouthed. "What's the plan?" Blake pointed to his watch, then held up 5 fingers. In 5 minutes, something was going to happen. He just had to figure out what. Gerard checked his own watch. "Blake should be arriving soon. Your husband strikes me as the protective type. I imagine he's outside right now, trying to determine the safest approach, which is why I'm going to make this simple." He moved to Charlotte, who flinched as he approached. Sean started to rise, but one of the armed men pressed a gun to his head, forcing him back down. "Your daughter is beautiful, Mrs. Cole. Newly married, her whole life ahead of her. I'd hate for that life to be cut short because her uncle couldn't let certain investigations remain buried." "Gerard!" Victor's voice came from the hallway, and Blake nearly swore out loud. His brother had stepped into the open, hands raised. "I'm here. Let them go." Gerard's smile widened. "The ghost returns. 8 years, Victor. You've been quite the thorn in my side, and now you've dragged your family into our business. That was unwise." Through the gap, Blake watched Gerard nod to one of his men, who moved toward the door to retrieve Victor. This was it, his moment. The man would open the door, creating a brief distraction. Blake's hand moved to the electrical panel beside him. These older buildings, he knew, had a quirk. The fire suppression system was tied to the same circuit breaker as the overhead lights. Overload one, trigger the other. He pulled wire from his toolkit and began rapidly creating a short circuit. In the other room, the gunman was opening the door, pulling Victor inside roughly. Gerard had turned his attention fully to Victor, his back to the wall where Blake worked. Blake connected the final wire. The circuit sparked, overloaded, and every light in the condo went black. Simultaneously, the fire suppression system erupted in a deluge of water, alarms screaming. Blake was moving before the sprinklers fully activated, smashing through the weakened access panel and rolling into the dark, soaking chaos of the condo. Chapter 6: The Engineer's Blueprint. Chaos erupted in the darkness. The fire alarm's deafening wail mixed with shouts of confusion. Blake's eyes, already adjusted from the dim corridor, gave him a crucial advantage. He'd mapped every position in his mind. Now he moved with purpose. His first target was the gunman nearest Carol. Blake launched himself forward, using momentum and surprise rather than strength. His shoulder connected with the man's midsection, driving him backward into a side table. The gun clattered away into the darkness. "Carol, get to the bedroom," Blake shouted over the alarm. Through the strobing emergency lights, now kicking in, Blake saw Carol grab Charlotte and Sean, pushing them toward the back of the apartment. Lorena and Dan followed, Dan showing surprising agility for a man in his 60s. The second gunman was turning, weapon coming up, but Victor was already on him, having used the darkness to close distance. Years of survival instinct guided Victor's movements. A quick strike to the wrist, the gun falling, followed by a sharp elbow to the face. Gerard Daniels remained calm in the chaos, backing toward the apartment's main door. The third gunman moved to cover him, professional and controlled despite the confusion. "Impressive, Mr. Cole," Gerard called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "But ultimately pointless. This building is surrounded by my people. You've locked yourself in a cage." Blake didn't answer. He was already moving toward the electrical panel, the real one this time, visible in the emergency lighting. If Gerard had people surrounding the building, then the play wasn't to escape, it was to bring help to them. "Blake!" Victor's warning came too late. The first gunman had recovered and tackled Blake from behind, driving him hard into the wall. Pain exploded through Blake's ribs, but his hand shot out, fingers closing on the building's emergency system. Not the fire alarm he'd triggered, but the actual panic button installed per Chicago building codes. He slammed it hard. In police and fire stations across the district, a priority alert would now be broadcasting. "Active emergency at this address. Occupants in distress. Immediate response required." The gunman was pulling Blake away from the wall when a lamp base crashed into his skull. Carol stood behind him, breathing hard, the lamp trembling in her hands. "That's my husband." Blake had never loved his wife more than in that moment. Gerard's composure finally cracked. "Enough." He moved toward Charlotte, his own pistol now drawn. "Everyone stops, or the girl dies." The room froze. Gerard had Charlotte by the arm, gun pressed to her temple. She was soaking wet from the sprinklers, mascara running, but her eyes were fierce rather than frightened. Her father's daughter. "Here's what's going to happen," Gerard said, his cultured voice gone cold. "Victor is going to come with me. So is Blake. You're going to hand over every piece of evidence you've collected, and then you're going to disappear. Truly disappear this time. If I ever hear from either of you again, your family dies. All of them. I've got photos, addresses, every detail of their lives. You'll never be able to protect them forever." Blake's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, possibilities. Then Charlotte spoke, her voice steady despite the gun at her head. "Dad, Mom said to trust you, that you always have a plan." Those words changed everything. Blake met his daughter's eyes and saw complete faith there. She believed he would save her. He couldn't let her down. "Victor," Blake said quietly, "the evidence we compiled. Where is it?" Victor caught something in Blake's tone. "In my bag. The blue duffel by the door." "Get it." Blake turned to Gerard. "You want the evidence? You'll get it. But then you let them all go. You get what you want. We disappear. You finish your exit plan. Everyone lives." Gerard studied him. "You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you." Blake's voice was calm. "In about 3 minutes, Chicago PD and CFD will be rolling up to a building that's blaring emergency signals. Are you really prepared for that conversation?" Uncertainty flickered across Gerard's face. In the distance, sirens were already audible, growing closer. Victor retrieved the duffel and brought it to Gerard. 8 years of evidence. Witness statements, financial records, trafficking routes, property documentation. Everything you're looking for. Gerard glanced at the bag, momentary greed overtaking caution. His grip on Charlotte loosened fractionally as he reached for the evidence. It was the opening Blake needed. Charlotte dropped. His daughter didn't hesitate. She went limp, pure dead weight, dropping straight down. Gerard's grip, prepared to hold a standing person, lost control. Charlotte hit the floor and rolled away. Blake was already moving. 3 decades of climbing construction sites had kept him fit. He closed the distance to Gerard in two powerful strides, his hand clamping on Gerard's gun wrist, forcing it upward. The pistol discharged into the ceiling, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. They grappled, Blake using leverage rather than strength, just as he'd done with the gunman earlier. He twisted Gerard's wrist sharply, applying pressure to the joint with precision born from understanding angles and force distribution. The gun clattered free. Victor had grabbed Charlotte, pulling her to safety. The third gunman raised his weapon, but Dan, Carol's mild-mannered accountant husband, threw something that hit him square in the face. A fire extinguisher from the wall. "I've had enough of this," Dan muttered. Blake drove Gerard backward, slamming him against the wall. Gerard's composure shattered completely. "You idiot. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've got judges, politicians, entire police units in my pocket. You can't touch me." "Maybe not," Blake said, breathing hard. "But I can slow you down. I can make your life difficult. And most importantly, I can make damn sure you never touch my family again." The sirens were right outside now, feet pounding up the stairs. Gerard's eyes went calculating. "This isn't over. You want to play games? I'll show you what real power looks like. Your wife's dental practice? Her medical license can be questioned. Your daughter's new husband. I see he works for a tech startup. I have friends in venture capital who could ruin that company. Your engineering firm? I can make it so no one in Chicago will work with you. I will systematically destroy everything you've built while staying completely legal and untouchable." Blake's expression didn't change. He pulled out his phone and held it up, showing the voice recording app that had been running. "You just confessed to human trafficking, attempted murder, and about a dozen corruption charges. On the record." Gerard's face went white. "I'm an engineer," Blake said quietly. "I think 3 steps ahead. I plan for failure points, and I record everything." He glanced at Victor. "My brother taught me that always document the evidence." The apartment door burst open. Real police this time, with tactical unit emblazoned on their vests, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Blake raised his hands, stepping away from Gerard. "Blake Cole, I called in the emergency. That man is Gerard Daniels, wanted for human trafficking, attempted murder, and bribery of public officials. My phone has a recorded confession. There are 3 armed men here who are his employees. The lead officer took in the scene. The soaking wet apartment, the scattered guns, the beaten gunman, and Gerard Daniels looking furious and trapped. Sir, I'm going to need everyone to put their hands where I can see them, the officer said, but his weapon had subtly shifted toward Gerard's men rather than Blake's family. As the police began sorting through the chaos, Gerard caught Blake's "I won last time." The rage there was palpable. "You think you've won? I'll be out by morning. My lawyers will bury that recording, claim coercion. And then I'll come for you. All of you. I'll make you watch as I." "Detective." A new voice cut through the commotion. A woman in a dark suit pushed through the tactical team. "FBI. Nobody moves." Blake felt a moment of fear. Was this another of Gerard's contacts? But the woman's eyes, when they met his, were sharp and honest. She looked at Gerard Daniels with an expression of satisfaction. "Gerard Daniels, I'm Agent Danielle Peck with the FBI. We've been building a case against you for 2 years. Thanks to you threatening this family in front of witnesses and on recording, we finally have enough for an arrest warrant." She nodded to the tactical team. "He's ours. Cuff him." As Gerard was being restrained, still sputtering threats and demanding lawyers, Agent Peck approached Blake. "Mr. Cole, I understand you've had quite an eventful 2 days. I'm going to need statements from everyone, and I'll need that recording. But first," she glanced around the room, "is anyone injured?" Blake took stock. His family was shaken, soaked, traumatized, but alive. Victor hovered near the edge of the room, uncertain of his status. Blake caught his eye and nodded. "Stay. We'll handle this together." "We're okay," Blake said, "but there's something you need to know." Gerard mentioned he has a final shipment, 12 women being held somewhere, scheduled for transport to an airfield in Joliet. "You need to find them before." "We're already on it," Peck assured him. "Based on your evidence and our own investigation, we have teams moving on 3 suspected locations right now." Blake felt some of the tension leave his body. Then Carol was there, wrapping her arms around him, Charlotte joining the embrace. Sean stood close by, looking simultaneously shell-shocked and impressed. Lorena and Dan hovered nearby, Dan still clutching his fire extinguisher. Victor started to fade back, heading toward the door, but Blake's voice stopped him. "Victor, stay." His brother turned, uncertain. "Blake, the FBI will want to know why I've been alive for 8 years. Then we tell them the truth," Blake said firmly. "All of it. No more hiding." Agent Peck had heard the exchange. She looked at Victor with recognition dawning on her face. Victor Barry? The journalist who supposedly died 8 years ago. At Victor's nod, she let out a long breath. "You've got quite a story to tell, and based on what I'm hearing, it's one we need to hear. But that can wait until we've secured the scene and gotten witness statements." She pulled out her phone and made a call. "We need rescue operations at 3 locations." As she rattled off addresses, coordinating the search for Gerard's victims, Blake finally allowed himself to believe they might have actually stopped this. But the look in Gerard's eyes as he was led away, full of rage and malevolence, suggested this wasn't truly over. Men like him had resources, connections, plans within plans. Blake made a mental note. Document everything. Stay vigilant. Prepare for retaliation. Because an engineer's job wasn't just building structures. It was maintenance, constant, careful, ensuring the foundation remained solid against all threats. And Blake Cole took his job very seriously. Chapter 7. The Setup. 3 days after Gerard's arrest, Blake sat in the FBI's Chicago field office, reviewing the evidence they compiled. Agent Peck had been true to her word. They'd raided Gerard's facilities and found 11 women being held in deplorable conditions. 1 woman had already been moved, but they were tracing that lead. The women were now in federal protective custody, receiving medical care and trauma counseling. Their testimonies, combined with the recorded confession and Victor's 8 years of documentation, built an overwhelming case against Gerard Daniels. Or so Blake thought. "Mr. Cole?" Agent Peck entered the conference room where Blake had been working, her expression troubled. "We have a problem." Blake's stomach sank. He made bail. Worse, federal judge ruled the recording inadmissible, claimed it was obtained under duress during an illegal home invasion. Gerard's lawyers are spinning the whole incident as a home invasion gone wrong, with Gerard as the victim defending himself. They're claiming the women we rescued were actually employees at his legitimate construction sites, and that we misunderstood the situation. Blake stood slowly. "That's insane." The women testified. "Are all immigrants with questionable documentation who are now terrified of deportation if they speak against a powerful man," Peck finished bitterly. "Gerard's lawyers are already working on them, offering help with their legal status in exchange for revised statements. We've got protective custody, but we can't force them to testify if they're scared." What about the physical evidence? The facilities, the financial records? All explainable as legitimate business operations, according to his lawyers. The facilities were storage warehouses. The women were employees. The unusual financial movements were business expenses. Peck's frustration was evident. Gerard's been building a legal firewall for 15 years. Every piece of damning evidence has a plausible alternative explanation. Blake felt fury rising. So he walks free? For now. We're still building the case, interviewing witnesses, but she hesitated. "Blake, I need to be honest with you. Gerard Daniels has power. Real, systemic power. Even with your brother's evidence and our investigation, there's a significant chance he beats this in court." Blake was silent for a long moment, processing this information. "Then, what happens if he does?" Peck met his eyes. "Then he disappears. Flees to a non-extradition country. Lives out his life in luxury, while dozens of women's lives remain destroyed and dozens more fall victim to whoever takes over his operation. And your family." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Blake returned to the safe house where his family was staying, a true FBI safe house this time, with armed agents providing security. Victor was there, looking healthier after 3 days of real rest and regular meals. Carol was making lunch with Charlotte's help, trying to maintain some normalcy. "Blake, Victor looked up as his brother entered. What did the FBI say? Blake relayed the conversation with Peck. The room fell silent. So we did all this for nothing, Charlotte said quietly. He still wins. No. Blake's voice was firm. He doesn't get to win. Victor studied his brother's face. Blake, what are you thinking? Blake moved to the table where they'd spread out Gerard's information. Agent Peck said Gerard has power. Legal power. But what Victor discovered is that Gerard's real power comes from staying hidden, maintaining his respectable facade. Strip that away, and what does he have? A criminal empire, Victor said. Connections, resources, dangerous men willing to do violent things. Exactly. Blake's mind was working like it did when he approached a complex engineering problem. Agent Peck said if Gerard beats this case, he'll flee the country. When? She mentioned his lawyers are pushing for a hearing in 5 days. If the judge dismisses the charges, Gerard will probably disappear within hours. Then we have 5 days. Blake pulled out a notepad and began sketching. Not building plans this time, but something different, a flowchart of Gerard's operation, identifying key vulnerabilities. Carol moved closer. Blake, what are you planning? Gerard's leaving the country because he knows his legal protections are crumbling, Blake said, still writing. But he's not just going to disappear. He needs to secure his money, tie up loose ends, probably exact some revenge on people who caused him problems, namely us. You think he'll come after us again? Charlotte asked, fear creeping into her voice. I'm counting on it. Blake looked up. Victor, Gerard's final shipment. The 12 women who were supposed to be moved to Joliet. The FBI rescued 11. Where's the 12th? Victor pulled out his laptop and accessed his files. According to my last intel, she was moved 3 days before the wedding. I lost track of her in Gerard's logistics network. She's leverage, Blake said. Gerard knows the FBI is watching him, knows his usual facilities are compromised. He'll be keeping her somewhere unexpected, somewhere he thinks we won't look. And he'll use her as insurance. If things go south, he'll offer to reveal her location in exchange for a deal. Agent Peck's words echoed in Blake's mind. We can't force witnesses to testify if they're scared. But what if they weren't scared? What if Gerard's power structure completely collapsed before the hearing? Victor, you spent 8 years studying Gerard's operation. You said he has corrupt cops, judges, politicians in his pocket. How does he maintain that network? Blackmail mostly, Victor said. Gerard's people gather compromising information on anyone who might be useful. Photos, recordings, financial irregularities. He stores it all as insurance, keeps people in line. Where? I never found out. It's his most closely guarded secret. Probably multiple backup locations, digital copies in secure servers. Blake's mind raced. If Gerard's blackmail material was exposed, if all those corrupt officials suddenly had their crimes revealed publicly, Gerard's protection network would evaporate. He'd be isolated, vulnerable, and the women would feel safer testifying, Carol added, catching on to Blake's logic. If the people who could hurt them were exposed and neutralized. But we don't know where he keeps that information, Victor pointed out. I've tried for years to find it. Blake smiled coldly. We don't have to find it. We just have to make Gerard bring it to us. He pulled out his phone and looked at the contact information Agent Peck had provided. Gerard thinks he's won. He thinks his lawyers will get him free and he'll disappear with his money and his secrets intact. But what if he suddenly believed all his secrets were about to be exposed? What if he thought someone had found his blackmail archive? He tried to secure it, Victor said slowly. Move it somewhere safe before he flees. Or destroy it, Blake added, which means he'd have to go to wherever it's stored. And we'd be waiting. Charlotte leaned forward. Dad, you're talking about setting a trap. But how do you make Gerard believe his secrets are compromised? Blake's smile widened. We're going to tell him. Victor, you've got contacts in Gerard's organization, right? People who fed you information over the years. A few. Low-level employees, people with guilty consciences. Perfect. We leak information that the FBI has a source inside Gerard's inner circle. Someone who's revealed the location of his blackmail archives. We make it noisy enough that Gerard will hear about it through his remaining connections. He'll panic, Victor said, excitement growing in his voice. He'll go to secure his insurance, not trusting anyone else to handle it. And when he does, we'll find out where he's keeping that final victim, Blake finished. Gerard's careful, but he's also arrogant. He'll think he's smarter than us, think he can handle this threat personally. And that's when we'll have him. Carol looked worried. Blake, this sounds incredibly dangerous. You're talking about deliberately provoking a man who's already tried to kill us twice. I know. Blake took her hands. But if we don't do this, Gerard walks free. He disappears, and we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, wondering when he'll send someone to finish what he started. Or worse, he replaces himself with someone even more dangerous, and the trafficking continues. So we end this, Charlotte said firmly. On our terms. Victor stood and moved to his brother's side. I've been fighting Gerard for 8 years alone. I failed, but together. He met Blake's eyes. Together, maybe we can actually stop him. Blake nodded and turned to his family. This is going to be risky. Illegal, definitely. I need everyone to understand what we're about to do. If things go wrong, they won't, Carol interrupted. Because you won't let them. You saved us at the Hilton at the safe house. You'll save us again. That's what you do, Blake. You protect your foundation. Blake felt a surge of love for his wife, his daughter, his brother. They were right. This was about protection, about ensuring Gerard Daniels could never hurt anyone again. Okay, he said. Victor, start spreading the rumor about the FBI's source. Make it believable but urgent. Carol, work with Agent Peck. She's not going to officially sanction what we're doing, but she might look the other way if we deliver results. Charlotte, Sean, I need you to research abandoned industrial properties in the Chicago area. Gerard will keep his archives somewhere secure, but accessible, probably a place he owns through a shell company. What about the final victim? Victor asked. If Gerard is keeping her as leverage, she's running out of time. We find the archives, we find her, Blake said with certainty. Gerard will keep his most valuable assets in the same location, his blackmail material and his human leverage. It's efficient, and Gerard is nothing if not efficient. Over the next 2 days, they executed the plan. Victor's contacts spread whispers through Gerard's fractured organization. FBI has a source. The blackmail files are compromised. They know everything. The rumor mill churned, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. Blake watched for signs that Gerard had taken a bait. And on the 3rd day, Agent Peck called with news. Blake, something's happening. Gerard Electronics are dark. He's gone off-grid, not using his usual phones or computers. His lawyers are frantic, can't reach him. And a traffic camera caught his car heading south on I-94 toward Indiana at 2 a.m. this morning. He's going to secure his archives, Blake said, feeling satisfaction. Did you track where he went? Lost him near Gary. But if he's heading to Indiana, he's going somewhere outside my immediate jurisdiction. Blake, what did you do? Created the conditions necessary for Gerard to make a mistake, Blake said. Agent Peck, I'm going to need a favor. An unofficial one. There was a long pause. Then, I'm listening. Chapter 8, The Architect's Gambit. Blake and Victor drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Gary, Indiana, a city of abandoned steel mills and crumbling industrial complexes. Charlotte's research had identified 3 properties registered to Gerard's shell companies in the area, 2 former warehouses and an abandoned manufacturing facility. The manufacturing plant, Blake said, studying the property schematics on his tablet. It's the most defensible, largest structure, and Gerard's company supposedly bought it for future development 8 years ago. Never developed anything, Victor noted. Perfect place to hide secrets. They'd left Carol and Charlotte at the safe house. Blake had drawn the line at bringing his family into direct danger. But Sean had insisted on coming, and Agent Peck had reluctantly provided them with GPS tracking devices and a suggested route that kept them a safe distance from official FBI operations. The abandoned manufacturing facility loomed against the morning sky, a massive concrete structure, 5 stories tall, windows mostly broken, exterior weathered by years of neglect. Gerard's car was parked near a side entrance, alone. He came solo, Victor observed. No backup. He doesn't trust anyone else with this, Blake said, which works for us. They approached carefully, Blake's engineers, analyzing the structure. The main floor would be too exposed. Gerard would set up in a more secure location, somewhere he could control access, with multiple exit routes if needed. Basement level, Blake decided. That's where I'd put high-security storage. Underground, concrete walls, limited entry points. They found a service entrance, a heavy metal door that Blake manipulated open using his tools. Inside, the facility was a maze of rusted machinery and collapsed corridors. But recent footprints in the dust gave away Gerard's path. Blake and Victor followed the trail, moving silently. Sean stayed close, looking nervous but determined. They descended 2 flights of stairs into what must have been the facility's lower maintenance level. Light spilled from a doorway ahead, and voices, Gerard's, talking to someone on a phone. I don't care what the lawyers say. I'm not leaving anything behind. Once I secure the files, I'll handle the coal problem permanently. Yes, the brother too, and anyone else who's caused me difficulties. Gerard's voice faded as he moved deeper into the room. Blake positioned himself near the doorway and peered inside. The room was large, probably an old machinery vault, now converted into a makeshift storage facility. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. A modern safe sat in the corner, and huddled in the cage along the back wall was a young woman, terrified, malnourished, but alive. The 12th victim. Gerard stood near a computer station, apparently downloading files from a server. His attention was divided between his phone conversation and the computer screen. Blake signaled Victor and Sean, "Wait for my move." He'd learned from his safe house encounter. Direct confrontation with an armed man was risky. But Gerard was distracted, and the room's structural elements provided options. Blake studied the ceiling, noting exposed support beams, hanging chains from old machinery, and a sprinkler system that probably didn't work. But what did work was the electrical system. He could see the junction box near the door, feeding power to Gerard's computer and lights. Blake whispered his plan quickly. Victor nodded, understanding immediately. Sean looked terrified, but game. Blake's hand moved to the junction box. He counted down silently. 3, 2, he pulled the main breaker. The room plunged into darkness. Gerard cursed, his phone clattering as he fumbled for a flashlight. Blake was already moving, using the practice path he'd memorized in that brief observation. His shoulder hit Gerard solidly, driving him away from the computer station. "Get the files," Blake shouted to Victor as they grappled in the darkness. Gerard was surprisingly strong for a businessman, and this time he brought a weapon. Blake felt the cold press of a gun barrel against his side. They struggled, Blake using every ounce of strength to keep Gerard's hand from pointing the weapon at anything vital. A gunshot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet went wild, sparking off metal somewhere to Blake's left. Blake twisted, using a technique he'd learned from watching way too many action movies, and drove his elbow back into Gerard's face. He felt something crunch. Nose or teeth, he couldn't tell. Gerard screamed and fell back. Blake grabbed for the gun, his hand closing on Gerard's wrist. They crashed into a filing cabinet, folders exploding everywhere. Light suddenly flooded the room. Victor had found a backup power switch. Blake saw Gerard's expression, twisted with rage and pain, blood streaming from his shattered nose. The gun was still between them, both men gripping it. Then Sean appeared, swinging a heavy pipe wrench he'd found somewhere. The wrench connected with Gerard's arm, not hard enough to break it, but enough to loosen his grip. Blake yanked the weapon free and stumbled backward, breathing hard. "It's over, Gerard," Blake said, the gun now pointed at the man who'd tried to kill his family. Gerard laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Over? You have no idea what you've done. Those files," he gestured toward the computer where Victor was frantically downloading data, "contain evidence that will destroy dozens of powerful people. Judges, politicians, police chiefs. When they find out you have that information, they'll come after you with everything they have. You've just made yourself a bigger target than I ever was." "Then I guess we'll have to release it all publicly," Blake said calmly. "Every file, every piece of blackmail, every dirty secret. Let the whole corrupt system collapse and rebuild from honest foundations." Gerard's expression shifted to shock, then fury. "You wouldn't dare." The chaos. Chaos is better than letting men like you operate in the shadows, Victor said, pulling a USB drive from the computer. I've got everything. Financial records, blackmail files, trafficking routes, communication logs. It's all here. Blake moved to the cage where the woman was held. Sean, get her out. Sean worked on the lock while Blake kept the gun trained on Gerard. The woman emerged, shaking but ambulatory. Victor helped support her. Blake, she whispered. Thank you. He said no one would come, that everyone had forgotten about us. Blake's jaw tightened. He looked at Gerard with pure contempt. How many? Over the years, how many women like her? Gerard said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Sirens echoed in the distance, growing closer. Agent Peck had apparently decided this operation was worth official attention after all. Sounds like the cavalry's arriving, Blake said. Gerard Daniels, you're about to face consequences you can't bribe or blackmail your way out of. And this time, there's nowhere to run. But Gerard's expression had turned calculating despite his situation. You think the FBI will protect you? With what I know, what I've documented about federal agents, prosecutors, even judges in this district, you're dead men walking. Both of you. And your families. Blake's control snapped. He lowered the gun and drove a hard punch directly into Gerard's face, sending him sprawling. That's for threatening my family. Again, Gerard lay on the floor, dazed, blood pooling beneath his head. Blake stood over him, breathing hard, knuckles aching. Blake! Victor's warning came just as Blake heard footsteps behind him. Multiple people, moving fast. FBI agents burst into the room, weapons drawn. Drop the weapon. Hands where I can see them. Blake carefully placed Gerard's gun on the floor and raised his hands. Blake Cole, Agent Peck knows I'm here. That man is Gerard Daniels, wanted for trafficking and attempted murder. The woman is his victim, and my brother has evidence on that computer of multiple felonies. Agent Peck pushed through her team. She took in the scene. Gerard bleeding on the floor, Blake standing over him, the rescued woman, Victor clutching the USB drive. Blake, she said tiredly, we're going to have a long conversation about civilian interference in federal investigations. Looking forward to it, Blake said. But first, that USB drive contains evidence of corruption throughout the Chicago legal system. Gerard's been blackmailing public officials for years. You're going to want to secure that before anyone else knows it exists. Peck's eyes widened slightly. She understood the implications immediately. Victor, give me that drive. Now. As Victor handed over the evidence and agents began securing Gerard and helping the rescued woman, Blake felt the adrenaline finally fading. They'd done it. Actually stopped Gerard Daniels. But Gerard's words echoed in his mind. You're dead men walking. Chapter 9. The Final Foundation. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of FBI debriefings, witness statements, and watching Gerard's empire systematically collapse on the news. The USB drive's contents had been secured, and Agent Peck's superiors made the strategic decision to expose it all. Every corrupt official, every piece of blackmail, every dirty secret Gerard had accumulated. The fallout was unprecedented. 3 judges resigned. A dozen police officers were indicted. 2 state senators were arrested. The corruption reached deeper than anyone had imagined, and the public outcry was deafening. Gerard Daniels was denied bail again, this time by a judge who hadn't been compromised. The 11 rescued women, now seeing Gerard's protection network destroyed, agreed to testify. The 12th woman, whose name was Rose Decker, became a key witness with detailed knowledge of Gerard's operation. Blake sat in the FBI conference room, exhausted, watching the news coverage with Agent Peck. Your brother's evidence, combined with Gerard's blackmail files, closed 16 separate trafficking investigations across 4 states. Peck said, we've identified 63 victims, 63 women who were trafficked, most of whom we can now locate and help. What you two did, it's going to save lives for years to come. At what cost? Blake asked quietly. Peck was silent for a moment. Gerard's lawyers filed for a psychiatric evaluation, claiming diminished capacity. But between his recorded confession, the physical evidence, and the testimony from dozens of witnesses, he's going away for life. Multiple life sentences, federal and state charges. He'll die in prison. Good. Blake felt no mercy for Gerard Daniels. But Peck continued carefully. Gerard had associates, people whose livelihoods depended on his operation. And you've made yourself very visible in this investigation. There could be retaliation attempts. I know. Blake had been thinking about this for days. How do we handle it? Officially? FBI protective services for you and your family for the next 6 months while we round up Gerard's network. Unofficially, she met his eyes. You did something remarkable here, Blake. You and Victor dismantled a trafficking operation that had survived for 15 years. You exposed systemic corruption, but you also made powerful enemies. My advice: stay smart, stay alert, and don't hesitate to call if anything seems wrong. Blake nodded. And Victor is officially alive again, which creates its own paperwork nightmare. But given his role in this investigation, I'm recommending witness protection be waived and instead offering him a consulting position with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. If he wants it, he'll want it, Blake said with certainty. It's what he's been fighting for since this started. 2 weeks later, Blake stood in the parking lot of Chicago Metropolitan Correctional Center, where Gerard Daniels was being held awaiting trial. He'd requested a visitor meeting, not with Gerard directly, but to deliver a message through the prison system. Agent Peck had arranged it with reluctance. Blake recorded a video message to be shown to Gerard in his cell. Gerard, this is Blake Cole. You tried to kill my family twice. You destroyed countless lives for profit. You corrupted an entire system to protect yourself. And you thought you were untouchable. But here's what you didn't understand. A foundation is only as strong as what it's built on. You built your empire on lies, blackmail, and violence. I built my life on family, honesty, and the principle that structures should protect people, not harm them. Your foundation crumbled the moment someone applied real pressure because it was rotten from the start. Mine held strong because it was built to last. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a cell. You'll have plenty of time to think about that difference. And every day you sit there, I want you to remember that you were beaten by a civil engineer who cared more about protecting his daughter than you cared about anything in your miserable life. You lose, Gerard, completely and forever. Blake ended the recording and handed the device to Agent Peck. Make sure he sees that. She smiled slightly. With pleasure. 3 months after Gerard's arrest, Blake stood at the altar of his daughter's second wedding reception, a small, intimate gathering with just close family and friends. Charlotte and Sean had wanted a do-over, a celebration not marked by terror and violence. Blake raised his glass for a toast, looking around the faces he loved. Carol, beautiful and strong, who'd held their family together through everything. Charlotte and Sean, young and resilient, already planning their future. Lorena and Dan, who'd proven surprisingly badass when it mattered. And Victor, clean-shaven and healthy, preparing to start his new position with the FBI task force next week. A year ago, I gave a toast about foundations, Blake began, about how the strongest structures aren't made of steel and concrete, but of love and commitment. I still believe that, but I've learned something else this year. A foundation doesn't just support what's above it. It protects what it holds from what's beneath. From threats, from corruption, from evil that would destroy everything you've built. Our family faced something terrible, and we survived because our foundation was stronger than the forces trying to tear it down. We protected each other. We stood together, and when we had to fight, we fought smart, and we fought as one. He looked at Victor. I got my brother back. I got to see him become the hero I always knew he was. He looked at Charlotte. I watched my daughter show more courage in one moment than most people show in a lifetime. He looked at Carol, and I was reminded why I married the strongest woman I've ever known. Blake raised his glass higher, to foundations that hold firm, to families that stand together, and to the absolute certainty that when you try to destroy what we've built, you will fail. Because we're coal strong, and we don't break. 2 foundations, the room echoed, glasses clinking. As the party continued, Blake stepped out onto the terrace, a different hotel this time, maximum security, vetted by the FBI. He looked out over Chicago, thinking about everything that had happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Agent Peck. Gerard pled guilty to all charges this morning. Life without parole, solitary confinement. Judge made it clear he'd never see daylight again. You won, Blake. You and Victor won. Blake smiled and pocketed the phone. Behind him, music played and his family laughed. Ahead, the city sparkled with possibility. Victor joined him on the terrace. Thinking about Gerard? Thinking about foundations, Blake corrected. How they need maintenance, vigilance, care. How you can never take them for granted. You saved us all, Victor said quietly. I spent 8 years trying to stop Gerard and failed. You did it in 2 weeks. We did it together, Blake said, and I couldn't have done it without your evidence, your courage, your years of preparation. You laid the groundwork, brother. I just finished the construction. They stood in comfortable silence. 2 brothers who'd lost each other and found each other again, who'd faced darkness and emerged into light. What's next for you? Victor asked. Blake thought about it. Back to designing buildings, I suppose. Creating structures that keep people safe. It's what I do. And if something like this happens again, if someone threatens the foundation, Blake's expression hardened. Then I'll do what I did to Gerard. I'll find their weaknesses, exploit their failures, and bring everything they've built crashing down. Because that's what engineers do. We understand stress points. We know how to make things stand strong and how to make them fall. He turned to his brother. But mostly, I'm going to focus on my family. On Charlotte's future. On supporting Carol. On rebuilding the years we lost with you. On living well, because that's the best foundation of all. Victor smiled. You've changed, big brother. Become harder. More dangerous. Not dangerous, Blake corrected. Protective. There's a difference. I don't go looking for fights. But when someone threatens what I've built, when they try to destroy my foundation, then they discover that the quiet engineer has steel in his spine and will do whatever it takes to protect his family. From inside, Charlotte's laughter rang out, pure and joyful. Carol appeared in the doorway, beckoning them back to the party. Come on, Blake said to Victor. We got a family to celebrate. And brother, welcome home. For real this time. They walked back inside together, into warmth and light and love. The foundation was solid. The structure was sound. And Blake Cole, civil engineer and protective father, had ensured it would stand strong for generations to come. Gerard Daniels rotted in his cell, his empire destroyed, his name synonymous with evil. And every night, as Blake kissed his wife and checked on his daughter and exchanged texts with his brother, he felt satisfaction knowing that justice had been served. The foundation held, and that was all that mattered. Epilogue. 6 months later, a brief news item appeared on page 8 of the Chicago Tribune. Gerard Daniels, convicted human trafficker, found dead in his cell at Metropolitan Correctional Center. Preliminary investigation suggests cardiac arrest, though authorities are investigating possible foul play given Daniels' high-profile status and numerous criminal associates who may have wanted him silenced. Daniels, 52, was serving multiple life sentences for trafficking, corruption, and attempted murder. Blake read the article over morning coffee. Carol glanced at the paper and raised an eyebrow. Interesting timing. Is it? Blake said mildly. Heart attacks happen in prison. Stressful environment. Uh-huh. Carol wasn't buying it. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Blake met his wife's eyes. Gerard Daniels died alone, abandoned by his associates, his empire destroyed, his name ruined. Whether his heart